Evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, October 16th meeting of the Shelburne Development Review Board. First, I'd like to open it up to public comment. As always, the first item on our agenda. If anybody has something to bring to the board's attention that is not on the agenda, unseen. We'll move on to the first item on the agenda, item number 3. Application SUB 1204R1, which is a continuance of an application by Robert Scharf. On behalf of Marvin Thomas for a final plan amendment to a site plan to reconfigure and add parking for future commercial use. The property is at 5115 Shelburne Road. It is located in the Village Center Mixed-Use District, the Village Design Review Overlay, and the Village Core Overlay District. So I need to swear people in that are going to speak to this. Thank you. Okay, I hereby swear or affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and to entitled to perjury.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, tell us once you bring everybody up to speed on this.
Last week the board expressed concerns regarding the safety and functionality of the proposed parking layout. No concerns were raised regarding the proposed lighting or the ramp relocation. For the board's comments, the applicant has provided a set of revised plans and adjusted parking design, with an adjusted parking design. The plans depict a new walkway. This is not in the original plans that connects the existing sidewalk from Shelburne Road to the property for pedestrian access. And I think Rob is going to talk a little bit about that. And then, as you can see up on the screen, that's the new set plan. It's the new parking. The spaces have been moved to the west side of the property instead of on the east where they were formerly.
Okay.
I think that's the best. And that's it.
Would you like to bring us up to speed from your perspective?
Robert Scharf, representing Whitstable Properties LLC, just in ownership. Again, going back after a few weeks, listened to your comments in terms of your concerns. Again, hired an engineer, a professional to go over the plans, improve them per your instructions, and we did focus west, which was the gist of our last discussion, and moved the proposed 2 spaces which were in the east. Can I?
Sure.
Can I point? There were 2 spaces proposed to go here. Yeah. There were 2 parking spaces that we proposed to go here. We had expressed concerns about the length of the backup. We shortened this. You recall it was close to the edge of the border. We shortened it to a small turnaround for just these parking spaces. We've moved the handicap space here. That's an offload area. This is an offload area. If you could see the lines there, the diagonals. So that's the handicap space. And we were able then to put the 5 spaces here, which was all approved prior in terms of coverage. And it's okay that we have 5 instead of 4, having moved the handicap space. Yep, so that's what we've done. And as Annie mentioned, one additional modification we thought was prudent was that we wanted to give some access to now the handicapped entrance from the road. And there's a sidewalk here. And we wanted to be able to get people around and in. So we proposed a sidewalk running along the side of the building there. And again, it's going to be screened here, and there's some trees and plantings as well that are envisaged. Thank you.
Questions from other board members?
Man, I would like to mention that, first of all, Rod, this looks great. This is exactly what I think we wanted, so
Okay.
I appreciate you doing that. My only comment would be this handicap access area. It said it's called, these are called 2 parking spaces. And my preference to either on the plat or the decision itself to say that this spot here is really just a handicap landing area. I wouldn't want that to become a space down the road.
Right, right. That is an offload area, yes.
So
It's not a space.
So Andy, in the decision, you could just mention that that second space is actually a handicap landing area, not an actual space.
I believe it's shown on the other.
I mean, it's crosshatched, but I wouldn't want it to be converted to a regular parking space and be that close to the road down the future.
Any other comments? Comments from the public? I agree, this answers the concerns that came up the last time. One question is, it says your sidewalk is going to be a ADA approved surface. I take it that's just going to be a concrete sidewalk?
I believe that's what it is.
Would you like to be making a motion?
Yeah, I make a motion to approve as written with the stipulation that the handicap load-off area gets identified as such in the staff report.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Discussion? All set.
Thank you very much.
Staff report.
Next on the agenda is item number 4, application SUB 13-02, which is an application by Shelburne Green LLC for a sketch plan approval of a commercial PUD consisting of 14 buildings, 12 new, 2 existing. Property is at 6221 Shelburne Road and is located in the Commerce and Industry South District. We've got quite a team here we need to swear in. Familiar faces. So I need to swear you folks in. I swear or affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, when it contains penalties of perjury.
I do.
Just when you guys get up to speak, if you could identify yourselves for our audience. Hang on 1 second. Usually I give Annie a chance to give us an overview.
I'm going to let the applicant.
Mr. Goldsmith.
No, okay.
Mr. Goldsmith.
Do the talking, since there are a lot of people here. I just wanted to bring up a few concerns that came up in the review. The existing structures, the 2 on the north side of the property, don't actually meet the periphery buffer requirements of section 1930.5A. In order to develop the southern portion of the lot as a PUD, the language would have to be changed in the bylaws to allow the exception that's allowable in the mixed-use district, which allows the minimum periphery buffer for existing buildings to be the distance from the existing building to the property line. That language does not exist in the Commerce and Industry South section of the bylaws. The other option would be to subdivide the lot into 2 lots and develop the southern portion as a PUD and leave the existing 2 buildings on the lot as is. That's pretty much.
Because that periphery buffer, just for some of our new alternates too, we cannot waive that periphery
No,
buffer.
you cannot. And this is something that was missed in our preliminary review of this when staff met with applicants. There is specific language in several of the other district PUD reviews that allow for the existing, when this existing building is involved, that allow the periphery buffer to be the distance from the existing building to the property line. That language is not present in the commerce and industry self language.
Okay. Okay.
Can I just ask you for clarification? So what you're saying is these buildings here, these setbacks don't quite meet the qualifications for a PUD. That would have to be...
Right, the applicant was aware of that, but I was under the impression, and I assume they were as well, that there was language allowing the exemption for existing buildings.
So you're recommending that an actual subdivision be done first to sort of break off this from the PUD? Is that basically what you're saying?
That's one option, or depending on the timeframe, the applicant could go to the planning commission and try to have that language added to the bylaws for that commerce and industry sales section.
Got it. Thank you.
Goldsmith, are you going first?
Yeah, my name is Graham Goldsmith Jr., and I've got a whole team here with me tonight to help me out. But I just want to introduce the property a little bit. I know I've spoken with some of you guys before about Shelburne Green and the initial redevelopment of the old Snelling property. I work with my father, Graham Goldsmith Sr., who's an architect. I grew up in Charlotte, actually played lacrosse here in Shelburne way back when. But so we're local people. We have a real dedication to this area at this point. And we've been trying to really kind of take old, functionally obsolete industrial buildings and turn them into something that's great for generations to come. We started with a project over in Williston called the Whitecap Business Park. It's the old Rosino Ski Factory and North American Headquarter building. We wound up getting the zoning change there to allow for office. We used a lot of glass and skylights to bring natural daylight in, and that's now an office park. We're going for a silver certification from LEED, so it'll be a green, energy efficient building. And really, we found that model worked quite well. We came here to Shelburne and felt like the town really needed a critical mass of office space. And this would have been, a nice area, great location, great setting to have that. Throughout the process, we, marketed a lot of the space to kind of incubator companies, smaller companies that were coming in, specifically some food-related tenants. And really what we ran into was that the cost of construction was just a little too high in revamping this space. So really we couldn't provide space at an affordable rate, but we still did have a lot of interest in space that was a little bit more general and kind of simple. So we had obviously this parcel of land here, 20.7 acres. We've had success in Shelburne Green. We're about 80% full, 82%. We have one 10,000 square foot kind of big chunk left now. But we were approached by some people who were interested in having some space here, and hopefully we could potentially build out something a little different for them at a rate that might be more attractive. So when looking at this site, we really try to create an environment that's inviting, that plays on the natural character and history of the area. So for Shelburne Green, we feel that this is a great kind of rolling hill here, a nice Vermont countryside. So what we wanted to do is create a series of buildings that look like, farm buildings. It's got a little bit more of a modern feel in terms of the building products used. But in terms of roof pitches and the geometric shapes of some of the buildings, they're somewhat akin to what you'd see on a farm. The idea being that we could start with 1, 2, or 3 buildings, see who comes along, and continue to build as we find new tenants. So, literally build what the market's demanding, and not sit on a lot of inventory. So what we have now is a series of 14 buildings. I think we've kind of talked about it in 2 different phases, in which, we would erect these buildings. We want to have still a nice feel. It's almost like a shaker-style village. And we'll have some of these guys show you as well, but there's some pictures of kind of a... So this is the site here. You can see the rolling hill. This is just an example of a shaker village where it's nice clean lines, fairly simple, kind of traditional. You have a nice kind of rolling hill where we want to have hay just like this leading up to the building, and then to the outside is nice clean lines, really looking more of the countryside, and then on the inside having gravel lots. You'll have kind of your main entrances, the loading dock if we need it, or rather the overhead doors. But really the idea is just try to create a product that people need, and do it in a way that's cost effective and really some of the food producers can afford. With that said, we would like to be able to accommodate the similar uses that we have in the other building. So if we do have an office user comes along that's a lawyer's office or dentist, that they might be able to utilize some of the space as well. So it's an aggregate of 70,000 square feet. That can kind of go up or down. Obviously, that's what we're applying. I don't think we'd be looking to build much more than that. One more thing I'd like to say about design features is we kind of felt that with Shelburne Green and then the Teddy Bear Factory, you have these 2 big monolith properties, really big in the sense of scale. So we wanted to break that up, and so the series of smaller buildings was, we thought, a great way to do that. I'm not sure what else we should address at this point.
For the record, Dave Marshall from Civil Engineering Associates. I think staff has brought up a couple of things in regards to parking counts and making sure that we're consistent with the off-street parking requirements of the zoning bylaw. Those are all things that we're very comfortable working with staff and coming forward with. One thing that we want to basically make sure that ultimately we come out of this particular process with is that there are a number of different uses that are allowed within the existing building immediately to the north that's been redeveloped. And we're basically looking for the same menu of uses in this particular, we'll call it the south half, that would enable some flexibility in regards to various tenants, a mixture of tenants. And out of all that, we may find out of our list that some of them are conditional uses. So we would obviously be required to come before the board for conditional use approval for those particular components. And if they make sense, then obviously include them in the mix. That being said, this particular project site basically has been set up in a way to take advantage of the investment in the turning lanes out on Route 7, as far as the shared use lane that basically allows for this new, or I'll call it the south entrance, to actually work as the main entrance for the entire Shelburne Green property. That being said, there's high pressure water that will basically be servicing this particular phase of the project. On the stormwater end of things, we have some excess capacity in the existing pond, but we'll ultimately be supplementing it to comply with the state stormwater management rules. On the wastewater end of things, we currently have an agreement to tie into the existing force main. We did get some comments back from Public Works, or at least from Chris Robinson, the sewer department. We'll work through with Chris on more of the issues of capacity downstream of this particular connection point to make sure that there aren't any adverse issues there. But otherwise, the project site has been set up in a way that recognizes a couple of different things. One, the 100-foot perimeter buffer that is required. And when a proposed commercial use is adjacent to a residential use, we have the gables immediately to the east. That particular buffer actually has to increase to 150 feet. And the applicant, in working with the Gables, when the original project came before the board, has actually created supplemental plantings to actually give them a leg up as far as maturity. In the meantime, this particular orthophoto in this particular area identifies the proposed project in relationship to the large wetland that creates the separation between the Shelburne Green property and the main pod of the homes associated with the Gables. And of course, those homes represent the closest, so it's about a 250-foot separation. And this particular plan doesn't show the benefit of the plantings that have been done since the renovation efforts associated with the original Snelling buildings. And I guess that's kind of the quick technical end of this particular application. And things that, going back to the traffic end of things, this particular turning movement included this particular phase as part of the traffic study to identify that this particular, these improvements had the capacity to meet the needs of not only the neighboring properties, but also the full build out of this particular property. So there's a substantial investment made in the widening of that particular roadway to support ultimately this particular phase as part of moving forward. Things that staff did bring to our attention that have been some issues with the neighbors is that we occasionally see cut-through traffic coming through Shore Road that basically goes through the neighboring properties. It's a residential area immediately to the north of the existing Shelburne Green buildings, and just the very speed of people cutting through. The reason they cut through is because they think it's quicker than sitting in the queue on Route 7. And things that we're going to be trying to do is certainly look at access points, educating the tenants to basically at least get the tenants not to do this particular cut-through aspect. We obviously want to focus the main or the south entrance as being the primary focus for this particular project, and that's going to help both get people in and back out again. But we recognize that this is a privately owned road. This is not controlled by the applicant, so there's a limited amount of things that the applicant can actually do in this particular area. But in regards to at least the existing tenants and users and the access to the road, we're going to continue to investigate how we can reduce that particular activity that is creating those secondary impacts on the neighbors immediately to the north. So that is very much on the forefront as far as things that we'll be working with the Pecor family, who does control that road, as far as ways of basically trying to deal with that, to the point where we've even been looking at gates and things that basically could not only stop the through traffic, but at the same time still allow emergency services access to various points of the property. So there's a number of different ideas that we're working on to basically address, or at least try to minimize that particular phenomenon that's going on, as being a good neighbor to all the people that live in the Green Hills area of this particular part of town. We're good. So I guess at this point, we'll leave it at that for questions from the board. Before we go to comments from the public.
I've got a question. Do you envision that all of the buildings will have an overhead driving door or a loading dock, some sort of truck access?
You envision that the majority of them will. It depends on the use, though. If we do have an office use, obviously we might not need that. The first person that's approached us is looking to do some warehousing, and he do some shipping and receiving. His building, I think, one up there. So we would need to do an overhead door for him. But we're trying to avoid having to do any recessed loading docks that would, be big and kind of not so good looking and not really in theme with the scale of what we're trying to do here.
I should just add it, as well as far as the site planning. My name is Adam Davis from Goldsmith Architects. The goal is also to keep everything kind of within the parking constraints. So instead of any site from Route 7, looking up at the property, you wouldn't see loading docks in front of you.
So the building square footage is shown, is that, you guys assume that's a maximum square footage? Like, for example, building 7 shows 9,000 square feet. if I, from a tenant, come in and I want that building but with 2 floors, could that increase, or is that assumed to be the total?
Let me answer that one. I think one thing we've been working with staff on is ultimately what would create the most flexibility, but at the same time control for the board as far as understanding how this gets developed. Things that we're thinking about is creating building envelopes, but at the same time a overall umbrella maximum as far as square footage, because obviously those particular umbrella numbers are going to be the things that generate the traffic outside of the property and secondary impacts to the community, the parking requirements. So we obviously will have an upper end, and again, depending on some of the land uses, will dictate ultimately what some of those parking space requirements and off-property trip end generation numbers would look like. But out of all that, we wanted to basically make sure that that the building sightings are consistent with the perimeter green space requirements. 2, that we are creating appropriate safety distances between buildings in regards to the fire department's concerns, and then at the same time providing the flexibility of how to move forward. So what we haven't figured out is, if there's a building envelope shown, what is the next level of review? Is it administrative within a certain group of design standards that have to be met, which would be part of the approval process here? Or do we leave it more open and require kind of a mini site plan to come back before you each time a new building is proposed? So we still have to work out that as far as what makes sense. What we'll be thinking about that, hopefully you'll be able to be thinking about that a little bit. We're not going to ask you to design it, but nonetheless to at least be receptive to the ideas of flexibility, but with enough controls that the goals of the approval process can be met.
Just generally speaking, too, I think most of them are going to remain one-story structures just for pure economics. To have to put an elevator in, to have, the fire stairs and a lot of common area space winds up being quite expensive. So, we can envision a building maybe changing from one of the 3 different building types that we have up there, but not going to 2 stories or anything.
So I've got a couple of questions. First of all, Annie, you mentioned in the staff notes that this was distributed to the Natural Resources Committee. Did they have any comments, or have they looked this over yet?
They have not made any comments yet.
So have they not made any comments, or not had a chance to look at it yet?
I don't know. I haven't received any comments. I don't know if they reviewed it.
Bill, if I may, just to kind of fill in the blanks on something we didn't touch upon as far as the natural resources in the area. Right now, on the east side, we had mentioned, if we look at the ortho photo here, the presence of the wetland. That is a Class 2 wetland. That basically requires certain separation distances from the wetland to any activity areas that would trigger jurisdiction in the state of Vermont. At the same time, in the southwest corner of the property, there is a large mapped Class 2 wetland that is going to be delineated in a more formal way. This actually works back up to a rock outcrop at that particular very far southwest corner of the property. But nonetheless, this wetland receives a lot of runoff from the Teddy Bear property that runs out through here, and then right at the end of the tree line, cuts out into the ditch along Route 7 and runs northerly, and eventually crosses back over just north of the Shelburne winery. So, vineyard. With that being said, the other things that are here is there's currently a wooded area that is on the northeast portion of Phase 2. You can see this particular line basically being a tree clearing limit, but basically the retention of the remaining trees within the 100-foot green space, the perimeter green area, as part of the program for screening between these land uses and the Gables property owners to the east.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, Dave, because that was going to be my next question about stormwater.
Did I steal your thunder?
No,
Sorry.
that was actually great, because Annie mentioned in her staff notes that she put an X mark where it says it fails the section 500 of our stormwater. I was going to ask for clarity about that, but I also wanted to mention that I like this project. I think it's a really good project for this area and a valuable one for the town. I'm sorry, what, can you tell me your name again?
Graham Goldsmith.
Graham,
Yep.
you already answered one of the questions that Annie talked about in regards to our goals, and that was energy efficiency. So I noticed right away that most of these roofs are south-facing, which would be great for solar down the road, and I appreciated you putting that in there.
Sure.
And so I wanted to talk about stormwater, and I was wondering if you had any other thoughts about, low impact development techniques, or I don't think you were present at the green design about stormwater issues that we had in South Burlington last week, but we had a lot of developers present, and they talked a lot about stormwater issues. In fact, that was the main focus of it, and techniques to minimize it. And I wouldn't mind if you just looked at stormwater issues in detail, and if there was any room for other techniques to be put in here.
Mhm.
Because that's an issue that the town is starting to deal with, and there's been discussion that we may have to have a stormwater utility, and it would be great if we can get ahead of the curve on that one.
No, that's fair. The one nice thing about this particular site, it's moderately sloping, which basically means that the use of grass-lined swales can be very beneficial as far as increasing contact time and treatment, as being at least a little bit more passive than just focusing everything directly into a traditional stormwater pond. Other things that can be done is, as far as roof runoff, is creating disconnections where you try to create a certain amount of green space on either side of the roof as a means of allowing the drops of water to basically re-infiltrate the ground as part of minimizing what actually leaves the site. So there will be some opportunities definitely on the backside of these buildings to accommodate that particular goal. And then, and the other thing that is good in a way is that the more natural gravel surface as opposed to curved paved parking lot will provide a small amount of infiltration, but more importantly it will allow again for not so much the concentration of flows, which mandates that you collect it and then do something with it. So that being said, I'm not going to say that some last factor safety feature won't be here at the end, but it could be much smaller than what otherwise would be necessary if we simply did a traditional urban collection, dump it, and let it all get treated in one location. So out of all that, we still have some peak flow obligations to meet, and when I talked about the disconnections, those work fairly well for the smaller storms, the 1-year event up to that. But once you get into the larger events, there's so much water that the ground just can't absorb it. So there's always going to be a situation where if we're going to protect the infrastructure, i.e. Route 7 and the conveyance culverts that are downstream of this particular area, we're still going to have an obligation to meet the peak flow situations. And you're going to end up having some type of detention structure. Now, in more urban environments, we sometimes end up putting those underground. But in this particular case, if the surface area is available, this is the most economical way to basically deal with those particular peak flow obligations. And again, one of the tenets, no pun intended, but one of the goals of this particular project is to create affordable space for startup companies. And we could gold plate this and basically make it unaffordable and we'll just lose sight of really what the goals are. One of the challenges of this particular building, once the Goldsmiths finally got into it, was there was a lot of remediation that needed to be done that just wasn't immediately recognizable. That being said, some of the challenges for startup companies, and my wife has one of them, is trying to find ways basically afford the space that ultimately you're moving into. And that being said, they've come up with some very innovative ways for these particular one-story structures to be both aesthetic as well as achieving the goal as far as affordability. So that being said, we're always trying to balance those things, but in this particular case, this is actually creating a product that not many other people are doing, and hopefully this is something that will again create that incubator space that will be, who knows what the next great Vermont product company will be.
And just keep in mind that, I agree with everything you said there, but if you had any techniques to help remediate stormwater, above and beyond this. If we ever do a stormwater utility, we'd be able to give you credit for those features down the road. And that our commercial properties would probably take the brunt of stormwater fees, and that could be, beneficial to you long term.
Correct me if I'm wrong, too, we have capacity on our existing stormwater system to handle all of phase one of this project, too. And we're trying to keep as much green space, too, out there as we can in between the buildings.
Tell me about the crosshatch area that says additional agricultural only use.
Well, I think that may, bottom line is that under Act 250, this property is subject to Act 250. Requires a demonstration of retention as much as possible of the primary agricultural soils. And that being said, this particular diagram shows some concepts of at least the non-active use of those particular soils. And I think that's up for discussion ultimately with the Department of Agriculture on what they will deem to be an acceptable area for credits as far as retention of prime ag soils versus those that have been impacted in a way that it doesn't make sense for agricultural use. And we're seeing a lot of movement from what has historically been traditional agricultural uses of property, where you looked for a reasonable width of the use area and a reasonable size. They have now recognized that with the pesticide-free products that are being offered in Vermont, that those can now be more economically viable on smaller areas. So anyways, what looks like something that a farmer would never say, no, I'm not going to go in there and bale for 4 square bales of equivalent, we actually may find that for other types of agriculture, especially integrated into an environment of this particular type, could actually create some viable agricultural uses. So that being said, the jury's still out on that, but that's a discussion that ultimately has to be completed with the Department of Agriculture in regards to what ultimately will be recognized as retained primary agricultural soils and what would be considered to be impacted as part of the Act 250 criterion.
Been to V-Trans yet?
At this point, we've talked to V-Trans only to the point where when we originally permitted the Shelburne Green property and presented the traffic study and the reasoning for the widening of Route 7, that at that time we said there will be a future project in the southern half, but that's the limit of the discussion at this point in time. So what we owe them is the program that's been at least preliminary outlined for you and the sketch plan as far as the amount of square footage, what that means for employees and trip ends moving in and out of the site, and then applying those numbers in comparison to what had been presented to them previously for concurrence that this is indeed consistent with their original idea of how this particular south access would be utilized.
And has this been to our fire chief yet?
He has seen a copy of the plan.
Okay.
He has not commented.
Specifically, I was wondering if he could comment in the staff report on if some tragedy would happen down in building 12 or 11 or 10 and then you get heavy equipment in there. Are we at risk of a bottleneck working through the parking lots to get where they need to be?
So on the southern end of the property?
Yes, correct. Yeah, and also making sure he's comfortable with the radiuses around the parking lots to get heavy equipment in as required to the south end. I will trust his expertise
Okay.
when he reviews that.
Dave, on that note, is there, since some of these buildings obviously are schematic, there's the potential that you could have tractor trailer access to several of them down the road, once a tenant actually commits?
Mm-hmm.
So have you guys thought about that as far as, if you've got office uses and, uses with tractor trailer access, that might get a little tricky.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's definitely a challenge as far as how to balance the access versus the impacts of temporary parking. Now, to answer the question in regards to at least the maneuvering of vehicles through this area, this particular parking lot is shown as actually being 70 feet wide. The standard tray for 2 parking spaces with the aisle is 60 feet. So what we've tried to do is create the additional flexibility. You know, it comes at a risk of obviously additional surface area, but nonetheless, it also was intended to provide flexibility on the turning radiuses on the corners. It was intended to provide perhaps some flexibility as far as choosing where you park to minimize the damage of blocking people in. And those are all, you know, what we almost need to do is kind of step away from the rural ideas and go back to an urban area, and how do the cities deal with this particular situation? Not trying to replicate the city of Burlington, but at the same time, there are those particular issues and then some in regards to how deliveries are handled and interrelationships of very tight spaces.
Yeah, we've been thinking about too, limiting to box trucks with lifts, or having a portable lift gate for some of the tenants as well. Potentially having a communal forklift or something like that to try to mitigate the fact that we won't have big recessed loading docks available.
And then just to bring closure to at least the access or the turnaround at the end, that is a standard cul-de-sac at the very end of the project. So from a scale standpoint, you might not recognize that, but that was the intention, was to basically facilitate that particular type of turning movement.
I see you only have one garbage enclosure, Dave. It seems, and I realize it's sketch, but it just seems like it's not realistic to have people take from
Yeah, we've been batting around
20,000 square feet
how to
building
handle
at the opposite end, so.
Yep.
Charging more rent.
I see you are going to put gas in here.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dick.
In the northwest corner, it looks like those 2 lots. One of them is played with Shelburne Industries.
Oh, up here? Is that what you're
Yes.
looking at? Yeah, that's a separate lot. That's John Kerner.
No, above
A little bit north of
John's,
that.
on the sketch that I have, it's showing in that corner.
It's a small parcel.
Yeah,
There
small
used to be a piece of land where there was a water tower that the town owned, and Mark Snelling traded with them. He basically swapped locations, gave them the easement in the back here, and recaptured that land, so that no longer exists.
So the lot lines that are on the paper should be.
I guess ultimately, if an application were to come forward where, well, right now, technically, that lot has never been absorbed into the major area. For tax purposes, it's always been considered to be under one ownership, but technically, it's a separate parcel. So whether it's the part of the PUD process where you want to clean that up, there's really no issue with the applicant as far as ultimately how that's handled.
And what is the lines that indicate the parallel lot lines? Right in the corner, is that?
Yeah, you can see them.
These lines here, or?
Those are on the landscape plan, you can see them.
I was looking at the parking,
You're talking about the northwest corner?
right in the
Dick?
northwest corner.
On which drawing are you on?
I'm not sure if you remember looking at it.
It's a landscape, you're looking at the landscape.
Yeah.
Might have been topography.
That's a parallel lot. North of what was the old water tower, or what,
Yeah.
it's shown on there, I don't know what it is, it's not marked as anything.
There's a dash,
There it is.
a double dash line
That's
right there, that right angle.
This one
It's
right
probably something that bled over on the background or something, because it's not on your other drawings.
You talking about the parcel line there?
Yeah, there's that line right there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is our setback line here
Right.
that we put
Yeah.
in, but this line here.
That's the old parcel.
So that boundary's been dissolved, Dave?
I don't think it's legally been dissolved, it's still,
When there's two parcels, they're considered the same for tax purposes, but
Yeah.
they don't have to technically merge.
Okay.
That piece could be sold to someone else at some point, and maybe merging that fully as part of this project would be it.
and actually, I think if we look closely at your zoning regulations and state statute, if that's considered to be a non-conforming lot and the
Yes.
adjacent conforming lot is owned by the same person for all intents and purposes, I guess they're required to become
They're
merged.
required, yeah.
So we should probably just take those lines off, minimize the penalty.
Yep, because I don't,
One more, on the buffer, I noticed the parking process, the buffer line, is that allowed in this district?
What?
The
Which
parking
line are you talking about, Dave?
In that same area,
Oh, in the northwest corner?
right?
Well, these are,
Well, those are existing lines.
those are existing, and that's one of the painful things of what got inherited here is these structures built in the 60s and ultimately the zoning morphing to the way it did to where we are today with PUD. It's very frustrating that an existing building makes you non-compliant or not eligible to proceed with a PUD, especially when you look at the southern half of this and, you know, the applicant has showed something fully compliant with what the zoning bylaw requires. Nonetheless, I think we will go to the planning commission and seek corrective language. That particular corrective process was actually done for residential PUDs. For some reason, the commercial got left to the side and we are where we are today. So we just don't think that subdividing the property which would actually require that the northerly buildings be changed, because to subdivide the property and create both a 50-foot setback from the existing building to the north and a 100-foot setback as part of the periphery green space on the southern half as part of the southern PUD, you'd need 150 feet between them, and all of those buildings would have to come further south. And it just seems to be it just seems to be a frustrating exercise.
Yeah, we really feel like our parking's a little bit underutilized in terms of what we have existing. There's about 30 spaces additional. So that's some of the reason we want to have those buildings close. We want to kind of cluster the buildings together, have the green space around the outside, and have people be able to use some of that additional parking that is left over. And like you said, with the setback, if you subdivide, we'd be very far from that.
So on the parking issue, I'm looking at an image on my computer here on Google Earth. This lot here gets full when you're having events here. Do you find that people are actually parking here and walking across? And do we have anything in our zoning, Annie, that would allow or require that the two properties could sort of work together on parking issues?
No, there's nothing that requires that. I think it has been recommended to the other property owner who is lacking parking that they might have to work something out with the applicant, but I don't believe anything formal has been arranged.
That was my next question, was there any interaction?
There hasn't been much to date. I mean, really, we're still feeling our way along. We have a 10,000 square foot space that's still available. So I'm not sure what capacity we will have at that time. And I'm not sure his willingness to kind of put in some landscaping and a path between, but obviously we can work that out with them. But really, I just need to find out what my full usage is.
Are they using your parking now, but, and when walking across when their lot gets full?
Occasionally we've asked that they don't, really for insurance reasons, and I've asked that they don't, and typically they don't, but I'm not there on the weekends much.
There's probably half a dozen cars there, so.
I mean, I think regardless of what's happening in practicality, I don't think that the board has the ability to base parking conditions for the applicant based on what another person may or not be parking there.
I wasn't looking at it from that angle.
Dave, did you guys look at an exit? You've got the entrance. Did you look at an exit as well, or is the prime ag issue prevent you from having an exit instead of a dead end?
It's, well, I
It
think
feels-
no, go ahead. No, go for it.
It feels like it would be better circulation if you could drive in.
We
and
had
drive out.
one at one point in time, because we thought that was perfect as far as that's concerned. The nice thing about at least the dead end is that it creates a little bit of more traffic calming at the end, so people aren't whipping through.
Right.
And it does have that secondary benefit as far as the prime ag impact. So that being said, that's why we invested in the monster cul-de-sac at the end as a way of mitigating those secondary impacts to the prime ag and what otherwise would be the fragmentation of that particular area. So there was a thought, and in fact it was on the plan at one point in time, but we basically retracted that, trying to again consolidate the amount of impervious area at this point in time.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like from your tenant standpoint, you know, if I was a tenant, I'd want, and especially if I had tractor trailer deliveries, I'd want them to be able to come in and go out.
And that's something that we'll still be looking at. Whether it happens now or we basically make sure that it can occur in the future is something that we're still need to work with you on, still need to work amongst ourselves as far as what makes sense in that area. But as far as the perfect world engineer circulation, yeah, we'd love to have that.
Yeah.
I have a question regarding the connection between buildings. I think it's 1 and 5 on the north side. Just wondering, I know this is a work in progress, but I wonder if it would make sense just to open that up so people could park, say, on the north side and walk through to access the south side of the buildings, or walk from the north end of the complex. It just, as opposed to going down the driveway.
Yeah, we're going to try to have at least some sort of pedestrian access through there. The idea just with that one was it was thoughts for expansion for the person who's looking at building 1 and to provide a common area loading dock for both sides so they could each access it. But absolutely, that's a great idea to have some sort of way for them to get easily from lot to lot.
And you plan to do this in 2 phases, you said, Graham?
That's what we're hoping for, yeah.
These buildings limit being, having sprinklers?
At the moment, no, they're all under 10,000 square feet, and it's another cost saving measure when the employee keep rates down. But depending on the use, they may require it for insurance reasons or things like that. Primarily, we're looking at a metal exterior as well, similar to what we have at Shelburne Green, where you'll have vertical and horizontal panels as well, which has a nice kind of modern look, but it still maintains the look of a barn as well.
So chances are they're not going to be wood frame construction.
We're actually looking at that for some of them. The majority of them, we were now building one. The user wants no columns, basically, so we're having to go back to metal. We're kind of reinventing it as we go along. But some of the smaller ones were thought possibly to do wood frame.
2,500 square feet, that's...
Yep, to go up quickly, to be cost efficient. You know, it's a good way to do it, absolutely.
So I'm just looking at the goals that Amy put in our staff notes here, and it occurred to me, I'd be curious to know, at maximum build-out, about how many, jobs you think permanent jobs that might this create in the area?
In terms of people working in the building?
Yeah, basically, workers.
Um,
Not construction, but, once it's built out.
Right, I mean, I think it could be somewhere around 160. That's what we're drawing in terms of parking, so it could be in the neighborhood of that. We have existing parking for 180 at the other building as well. So there's capacity there for quite a few new people.
And we are fortunate in the fact that it is on the bus route that currently goes out to the Teddy Bear, that again, those people who don't want to commute by a car can do so through the bus. So those numbers, again, it's easy to equate in the old school world of 1 person per car or per parking spaces. There actually may be some opportunity for that handful that's riding the bus to be included in that also.
On that note, there's I wouldn't call it a dense community, but there is a housing community just to the north. do you think we've addressed, any pedestrian access issues or, or any workers who might live, within walking distance?
We haven't looked at that in detail. We do have sidewalks going north-south along the main building. It's absolutely something we could look into. It's like a kind of circuitous route for someone to walk based on the paths that we do have. But we do have, walking paths as well that kind of go around the property. We do have some people that do walk the teddy bear factory.
Have you guys talked to CCTA about a stop at the bottom of either of these, or a shelter?
We approached them during when we were doing Shelburne Green, and really they weren't very responsive or open to it at that point. I think at this point, perhaps we could go back to them again and say with the additional usage here.
Things have changed a lot with them in the last couple of years, even a year.
Yeah. But absolutely,
Their ridership's more than doubled, and
we'd
they found
love that.
They found a lot of money for bus shelters. They're putting them all over the place. But I wouldn't mind seeing some type of a pedestrian accommodation up the south driveway. And I recommend taking a pass at CCTA and put it in the plan now, because and lighting. I just know it's probably way early to be talking about lighting, but do you have any ideas what you think you're gonna do there as far as roadway, parking?
What we've done at the other project, we have some parking lot lights and then some down-facing wall packs. So we're hoping that with the proximity of a lot of these buildings to the parking lots, that wall packs will be able to provide the majority of the lighting for those spaces. And we'll need to obviously supplement with some poles in areas where there's less light available. But that's something we just started looking into as well.
Yeah, for me personally, I think that'll be a real important part of the project, is lighting it correctly, because as you're driving in from the south, that has, to me, that has the biggest impact. Yeah, after dark.
Well, again, one of the things by actually mounting them on the buildings, it is going to limit the height of those particular luminaires. And that being said, that will help again what otherwise, with a 20-foot high light, you still could be looking up underneath it and getting some of those secondary impacts. Where again, putting them on the building mounted with a forward throw creates the opportunity for more localized lighting. Again, lower mounting heights also mean more luminaires, but nonetheless, with the LED products that are available today, at least on the energy end, it's very attractive.
Yeah, so just for example, this building here, we've got a wall pack here that services this whole area in here. So the thought being, one here could go here, and et cetera, and down the line.
Any other questions from board members? So anyone from the public that would like to ask any questions of the applicant? Going once, going twice?
Well, I'm a Gables resident,
Okay.
and we are Gables residents, and of course, and we happen to live in these, personally, the two of us live right here. Peter you live up here, and Ann lives further up here, but we live right here at the border, so we're very concerned about the blockage of the trees. We asked that for the teddy bear factory. We got more than we asked for. Now those trees are huge, and it's great, but we'd like to make sure those trees would be adequate. And then when you were mentioning the trucks coming in, and maybe in the back here, the trucks, would that impact us with having these big tractor trailers and the loading zones here that would be then close to us here? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah,
Sorry.
right. Yeah. Okay, so right here, so we are here at the Gables, and we happen to live right at the border. Yeah, you guide my hand. Yeah, we're right down here. So we're concerned about the activity here coming through.
Actually, the trucks would be coming in on the
Through the
front of those
front.
buildings.
There's really no
They'd be
access,
coming here, right?
there's no access to the buildings from.
Oh,
from the
right,
back,
so
right.
nothing would be coming there.
Right.
Right.
That's true.
Buffer areas behind there.
Right. And would there be fences here? Because actually, we've already noticed people coming along our grass here and going through the woods here and wondering where that, I haven't taken the walk there to see where that actually goes out. If they disappear into the woods, but they're right on our grass. I mean, I live right here.
So Dave, is that a 100-foot buffer between the?
150. Yeah, 150.
Yeah, so you have 150 feet in between your house and the back of those buildings.
Plus the wetland on the other side.
Right here,
At least 100.
wetlands and buffer.
And we did put a wire fence in that goes along that whole border there. But I'm sure they're probably sneaking around the corner past the property line.
That's what they're doing, and it's a little disturbing to have them coming right on our back. You know, there's some like living room windows and the curtains open and everything, and for 13 years, you know, it's been really lovely to have that property that did not get the Snyder, the 29 Snyder homes, and to have that, it's just hard, you know, and especially to have the invasion of human beings coming through there right on our, you know, our common.
Is that like a walking path people have created or something?
If that can be better cordoned off so that people would not have access to that.
So is it like at lunchtime, people are walking their lunches?
I don't know.
Well, the fence actually, they built a very nice fence on the property line, but it does end about 5 or 10 feet north of the east-west property line. And apparently people are walking along the edge of the south edge of the Gables property and into the Shelburne property, which is right now
we're right
is undeveloped. I'm not sure why they went through there.
Yeah.
Pizza.
That goes right on our border.
I'm not sure what they're doing. Where were they going? Because
I don't know, they were coming right on the grass and going through the woods there, and we don't know. We'll have to take the walk ourselves.
But the fence can be extended.
If the fence could be extended, that would be great,
Yeah, I think it,
to really seal that.
and I suppose I should note that the trees that were planted, which were nicely planted, but they're not doing so well, and they need to be looked at again.
That was
They
as
need to
part,
be
that was
checked
as
out.
part of this project? or-
Well, it's part of the phase one, but it was something that was made by the people for the Gables, which we appreciated.
It was part of an agreement between the parties as
Yeah.
far as mitigation for
Yeah.
as part of future development. It wasn't part of what I'll call phase one or the redevelopment plan. It wasn't on your plans
Oh, okay.
as part of the approved or required plantings, but it was something that was worked out between the neighbors as far as supplemental plantings. And this particular application would formalize those as being plantings that would have to be retained.
Yeah. It wasn't between us, it wouldn't be a part of that.
So,
The wire fence along that whole border there, and then the little white pine trees.
I take it there's a homeowners association at the Gable, and have you been in contact and communication with them, Graham, with the homeowners association there?
We have in the past, yeah, and absolutely we'll follow up with you guys again.
Apple Tree Bay,
Okay.
that's Apple Tree Bay, Keith McManus.
Yeah, we haven't had contact with them recently, but they did.
Yep. Yeah, well-
Responded very nicely on the first, when they first project.
Yeah, with the idea that they wanted to get them in and planted so they'd be a little more mature by the time something does
Very
happen there.
nice.
So it doesn't-
Very much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Could I just ask if, in doing, redoing, if there is any redoing, by the way, I agree that it is a wonderful idea. They're trying, as it says in the paper at least, to bring in agricultural activities and forestry and little shops that might be using local products and so forth. I think it's a great idea. My biggest worry is what's going to happen to the water, because you can see on this map over here, the large swamp area.
Which is on
And
our.
I
on
wonder
our
if
Gable
it
property.
could show on the next map how this whole wetland area and our farthest down units might be affected by any small drill.
No, it's the original.
Drainage.
It's,
Okay.
That's
it's on the Gables property, but it is wetlands.
all of
I
that.
think that would probably come into play in Act 250. would it not?
It would be part of the state stormwater management plan, as well as Act 250, that's correct, as well as the obligations under your own regulations as far as demonstrating no adverse impact.
So that would come up in the Act 250 hearing, which is gonna be separate, or? yet-
I think it's all part and parcel. I think you get three different bites at the apple here, as far as both our commitment, as far as demonstrating to the board that the proposed project, it's equivalent to a site plan approval, has met those particular standards,
Mhm.
which stormwater is one of them.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the state stormwater management permit requires demonstrating compliance with certain standards, and then Act 250 also is going to be looking at those things in regards to impacts on abutting properties.
So as abutting landowners, we would be notified of those meetings?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Well, as far as Act 250,
Yeah.
as well as these meetings, you are abutters and will be legally noticed.
Good.
As far as the state stormwater permit application, that typically doesn't have a notification process associated with it as far as the abutters. So you'll get it through the other two aspects.
This came up last meeting. Annie, we would send a letter to the homeowners association
Yeah, Gables
or to the
Association.
individual property owners, and then,
Gables Association.
and they notify you? Did they notify you of this meeting tonight, for
Did
example?
we get, I believe we did, yes, we did. I'm not the manager, but the manager, I'm on the board, the manager notified us, yeah.
Okay.
We were notified, yeah.
It went to the management company.
And they did notify you?
Are you board director? I am.
Anna's board director.
Okay. It just came up a couple weeks ago, and as far as homeowners association.
Well, we did get, the first notice for the first project was delayed, the notification got sent to the wrong, yes, but that's been rectified.
Okay.
Worked out
You plan on having any tenants that will do some shift work at nighttime? And, I'm only asking that in relation to the Gables here as to what type of activity that can entail with noise and lighting and whatever and that.
Typically, we don't expect that. Obviously, they'd have to adhere to any law in the state about, or the town about decibel levels at night and not, disturbing any of the neighbors. I don't foresee that as being an issue.
I guess the question is on the existing project, what do you see as far as usage beyond the core work areas?
We aren't seeing really any of that whatsoever. We do have one company that during Christmas time, they're going to be working maybe a little bit later, but we're talking 8 o'clock instead of 6. But beyond that, nothing.
And those activities are primarily inside the building?
All indoors, yeah, so no outdoor activity. And that's just a warehouse.
Okay.
The land commission was informed by, did you catch that state meeting about the north end of Route 7? They're having issues with a new brook. And they mentioned that Monroe Brook Shelburne is going to be charged with doing something with Monroe Brook. We're gonna get a 3-year period of time to work on it. And I don't know much more than that, other than we got kind of a pre-warning that this is coming.
In terms of stormwater?
So, yeah, and I don't know much more than that.
It's currently an impaired waterway. It's identified by the state as being impaired by various development practices, the historical neighborhoods that have come in and just thrown the stormwater into the receiving stream has caused impacts that have been identified with those particular types of land uses, and as such, need to be mitigated as part of the federal obligations on the Clean Water Act. So that's the program, is ultimately the general permits that are going to be issued specifically for Monroe Brook will call for certain action items to be put into place. And that's, again, very much a community-based issue, which Bill's trying to steer us away from having to deal other brooks in the future. But in regards to at least the current stormwater management permitting program, the intent is to minimize both water quality impacts as well as peak flow impacts. That if we had those in place for our original neighborhoods that were built in the 50s and 60s and 70s, we probably would have half the issues that we have today, or maybe even less than that. But nonetheless, those are some of the tools that we didn't have the foresight to put into place at that time, and now we're paying the price for it.
Okay. Any other comments from the public? From the
I
applicant?
might have one quick question. Just due to some time constraints, we do have one person who's looking, and of course he's saying, I'm bursting at the seams with my production. I'd love to be in as soon as possible. Obviously, changing the language to reflect the PUD residential code is going to take some time. I did notice, that it says the board may establish alternative other setback standards as part of the PUD. I didn't know if that's at all something you consider, or you might have already said this. And
No, I don't think it was mentioned. It was mentioned, I think maybe at our preliminary meeting. That only refers to the setbacks inside of the PUD, meaning that if you had lots, which yours doesn't, you can have 0 lot lines between parcels within the PUD if the board wanted to waive those setbacks, but they aren't at liberty to waive any of those free buffer requirements.
For free buffers is different. You do have the option of subdividing the property. So, it could be a lot of work.
the extra setbacks within the property becomes difficult. Got it, thank you.
I think we have more leeway with those
We
setbacks.
believe that they can do that. The board would be able to, if you were to subdivide, would be able to create 0 lot lines or waive the setback between lot 1 and lot 2, if they were so inclined. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, I guess you'd almost need to do it in a phased way. So if we just look at this as far as ultimately the full build-up, the PUD, the fact that we have multiple buildings on one lot would require that we have a 100-foot perimeter setback free of buildings or
Oh.
parking lots. So the existing parking lot that's north of the most notably proposed buildings, you would see 100 foot of green space there before the first building could be set. And that obviously represents one challenge of the integration of the new buildings in with the existing campus. The
That's a
only
topic
other
for the
way,
planning commission, I think.
yeah, the other way that could be done would be through a subdivision where each building sits on its own lot. But that would have to comply with the cookie cutter standards as far as side yard, front yard, rear yard setbacks. The board is, I understand the board is allowed to give some waiver opportunities under a straight subdivision, but only if it doesn't adversely affect full compliance with the zoning bylaws. I.e., you have 2 documents, you have a zoning bylaw, and you also have subdivision regulations. And it basically says that if you do a straight subdivision, that anything that might be in here that is more stringent than this standard could actually be waived to a point, but you always have to comply with the zoning bylaws. So that's where the PUD allows us to do some additional flexibility on the inside. But the town attorney has been pretty clear that the exterior perimeter green space, whether it be a 50-foot residential or a 30-foot residential green space or a 100-foot commercial green space, can't be waived. And as much as we like to look at the language and think there's a way to do it, He's been pretty clear, unfortunately, in the past, so I don't want to pull the rug out from Graham. It is a frustrating exercise, because when we're working with zoning, zoning has a basic tenet that if the building's been there, or if the use has been there before zoning was created, you're basically grandfathered and you can go forward. The unfortunate thing here is that we're trying to apply a new subdivision on one parcel, i.e. the PUD. And unfortunately, that encumbers everything, and the way the words are written right now, it basically says, sorry, you can't do a PUD because your existing buildings are in the green space unless you tear down the buildings, which seems a little counterintuitive. But nonetheless, I think the next exercise for us is just to go to the Planning Commission and seek relief, similar to what was done for the residential component of the planned unit development regulations. And that being said, get to a point where if we had had hindsight, we would have done that a couple years ago. But anyways, that being said, I think that is really, the PUD is really the best tool to basically accommodate this particular type of project. And unfortunately, it just means there's extra steps that are going to create some timing challenges. Annie, quick question as far as, and I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but I don't know if you have been advised, if the town attorney has advised you on when the zoning changes actually need to be in place to enable either 1, 2, or the third step of the approval process. Sketch plan typically, if you know you need to have some change in the future, does that need to be in place before a preliminary plat approval, or does it need to be in place prior to a final plat approval? With the understanding the applicant takes the risk of going forward with a plan relying upon a future zone change that there's no guarantee will happen.
It would definitely need to be in place prior to final plan. I'm not sure about preliminary, something I can check with the town attorney on.
There have been issues in the past. I believe that happened with Cabot property, old regulations versus new regulations and sketch. So, yeah, you'll want to get an opinion on that.
If you gave Brian a call, you could probably get on next Thursday's agenda.
We're already going to see him on one proposed zoning change, but you're right.
Package deal. All right, well, we've got a pretty good-sized agenda here tonight. What's the feeling of the board on this? We've got draft motions to continue. We do need to classify this at some point in time as a major subdivision. We can get that out of the way.
There's nothing here that posed any kind of challenge, I don't think. I think everyone kind of felt good about things.
Yeah, I mean, generally, the purpose of this is to kind of get feedback back to the applicant and get input from the budding property owners. I think we've accomplished that myself. So I'd entertain a motion.
We have to classify this?
Yes, we do, actually. So somebody needs to make a motion to classify this as a major subdivision.
I'll do that. I move to classify subdivision application SUB 13-02 as a major subdivision.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Discussion? Okay, that's out of the way. We either have a draft motion to either authorize them to prepare a preliminary plan application or to continue this.
I feel comfortable to move to preliminary plan application.
Okay. All right.
Will I make that motion as written?
If you'd like to, sir, yes, we will. We'll sign you up for that.
I'll second that.
All right.
So I just wanted to add, do you feel comfortable going to preliminary without, us getting the zoning issue resolved?
If that particular process, Bill, had never been done before, I think we'd be going, oh, let's get the temperature on this a little bit before we go and jump into a preliminary plat. But the fact that this exact issue was already not legislated, but I'll use that word, through the process as far as the change in the zoning bylaw to facilitate the recognition that you shouldn't have to tear down a residential building to facilitate a planned residential development. I feel very comfortable that this would also be an acceptable modification of the zoning. That's my opinion. Obviously, Graham gets to make the final decision. But I guess before we go headstrong and prepare a lot of investment, we need to do a little bit more homework on a couple of things.
One thing is we're not really, when we approve a sketch plan, we don't really approve a sketch plan per se. It's not necessarily a decision item. We're basically saying that,
We've done the process.
we've been through the process. There's been no contentious issues. We've decided not to continue it and take more testimony, or look for more information for you. I think we're there. So it's not an approval per se. It's more of a go to the
More
next
of
step if you wish.
Just opening the door. That's
Right,
it.
exactly. That's the purpose of the sketch plan.
Yeah, that works for us.
Absolutely.
So, we've got a motion able to authorize them to prepare their preliminary plan application if they wish.
It's been seconded.
It's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Discussion further? All right. Very good.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Good luck. It's Thursday. Okay, back to the, some seawalls to look at. So I need to just announce that I know from listening on TV that nobody can hear anything until they leave. Okay. Application SUB 92-7R4 by Christoph and Ellis Lisrod has been continued. So, not sure if anybody's watching or here for that application, but it has been continued.
Do we have to make a motion to actually continue that?
We do need to make a motion to continue that, don't we? Because it wasn't pulled off the agenda. Let's, Rob?
Well, the applicant had requested it to be continued.
Okay.
I believe last time we said we didn't need to, I'm not sure on that.
Do we have a date certain that they want to continue it to?
The next hearing.
Just next?
We do continue. All right, well, let's just do that. It can't hurt to do it. Let's, anybody like to make a motion to continue this application to the next
I would.
hearing, which is on
November 6th.
November 6th?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. That one's out of the way. Next, item 6 is application CU 13-16 is an application by Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of Charles and Valerie Maniscalco for a conditional use approval for a lakeshore erosion control structure. Properties at 151 Ordway Shore Road is located in the Rural District and the Lakeshore Overlay District. Need to swear anybody in who will speak to this. I swear affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and the penalties of perjury.
I do.
Very good. Annie, would you like to give us a quickie on this one?
Sure. The applicants are proposing to construct a large stone retaining wall along the shoreline that has been impacted. I'll let Steve tell you the details of that. As far as the zoning review, this proposal does not appear to raise any issues pertaining to conditional use review criteria or any issues under the rural zoning, floodplain, and water course overlay district requirements, with the exception of section 1816, which requires the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources project review sheet, which I have been advised are coming at some point. Okay. Board members may want to request clarification on some of the lakeshore overlay requirements as noted in the staff reports, particularly section 1715 3A4, visual compatibility with the surrounding natural shoreline, and 1753A5, biotechnical erosion control methods. Also noted in the staff report.
All right. Mr. Block?
Again, my name is Steve Bach. I'm from Civil Engineering Associates, and this is the first of...
Do you want me to put the big one up, or do you want to go from there?
that would be fine. So this will be the first of 3 shoreline projects we talked about tonight. So, and I am here tonight with Val Maniscalco. Oh, sure. As far as the shoreline is concerned, as Annie was talking about bioretention and impacts on the shoreline, this is a shoreline. This is the only open piece in this area of this beach area that is not protected by large boulders that would protect the existing embankment. And there is a lot of erosion that already has occurred on this embankment. So the applicant is hoping to finish off the wall that exists. This is a piece of property that was adjusted into their existing property and added to over the last couple of years. And it's the only area that does not have that protection. And the proposal for this is just the extension of the existing stone that's out there, which is, it is a Panton stone. It's a large Panton stone. It's anchored into the existing shoreline, and it has a very nice look to it, and this would be just a continuation of that. I don't know if there's a picture that I can show you. Well, actually, you don't have the pictures, do you, Annie? Okay. Well, probably tough to see, but
Is it going to be like the abutting property?
Is this
It
the
is.
stone here, Steve?
You can see it on this.
yes, and you can actually see a lot of the erosion that's occurring up here. You can see all the root system and everything else into here. And there's also a stairway that you can see in the backside that is being proposed to be removed. And
Will it be 2 walls similar to that one?
I'm sorry, Dick, can you show me that?
Will it be 2 walls similar to this? Or is that a second?
It's not what's shown on the plans.
No. It's just one wall. Yeah, it's just one single wall, and it's actually a fairly short wall because actually the bottom of this wall would be somewhere around elevation 100, and only going up another 4 or 5 feet and benching off. Because the other thing that we'd like to do is protect the existing trees that are already out there. So if we come up too high, then we'd have to take those down as part of the embankment, and we'd prefer not to do that. So, but there is a lot of erosion. It does need protection. It will continue to get much worse as time goes on, and it's the only area that's not compatible with all the neighbors. So it is our proposal to go ahead and extend that existing wall and tie into the neighbors to the north, which that's the Van Wagenen property.
Steve, is the new stone, the color going to be pretty similar to the existing?
It'll be exact because it is the Pant stone. There are some color differentials occasionally. The veins changed ever so slightly, but it's pretty consistent.
Like white, blue, gray.
Exactly, more grayish than blue. But it's got a really neat texture to it because it's got a very rough texture to it and a lot of character.
Did we get this from Pike's Pit in New Haven or somewhere else?
No, that comes from a different pit. And right now, I believe that Bird's Eye Construction is pretty much got the lock on using that material.
I guess it was mentioned in here something about the storm from 2011 doing a lot of the erosion.
That was certainly part of it, and some of it's continued on. So what happens is, you know, the way that we build these walls is on our beach, you know, the beach that exists there right now, we will anchor these large stone boulders, and some of them can be between 2 and 5 tons each. And okay, and got too many things here. They can be between 2 and 5 tons each, so they're very large. Sometimes when they get delivered, there'll only be 2 stones in the entire truck. And the reason we do that is so that when they are anchored, they're much less susceptible to erosion and movement. So we usually anchor the first one, and that might be anchored half of it, maybe 2/3 of it, and then we continue to place them to whatever elevation we feel is appropriate from that has the exposure. We also put a geogrid behind it to tie it together as like a monolithic type design, and we put shot rock in there. But in this case, in addition to that, so we have shot rock that would be placed directly behind the wall. In this case, the owner would also like to kind of reestablish a green space in this area. So in the area outside where it's darkened, on each side of that, we're actually bringing in topsoil and reestablishing vegetation up there. In the dark area, you can see there's a drainage way that comes in through this, and this is a very natural area. It's a beautiful area. It's a lot of flowers. There's a lot of berms and that type of thing. But it does have a drainage area that funnels all the way down through there. So we suggested to come in and tie right into the shot rock, which actually then takes that and eliminates any kind of a point discharge and does a linear loading and actually helps improve the water quality, you know. And you actually never see that water come back out. So that's, like I said, in the continuation, would join in this area and extend it up to here.
Now, when you have that stone drainage swale, and then you're going to tie it in down below, will you not want to continue the stone drainage swale going down, or would you be eroding some of that?
Well, actually, they've done a very good job of using vegetation to also, it looks like you got this major drainage swale coming through and everything else, but actually it's very well done, and it's actually a lot of vegetation in through there, and that, you know, a lot of protection there for erosion at that point. So I think we're fine with that, but we do want to get that into some of the stones so that we can dissipate that discharge.
The only other question I had is, obviously this would look nice because it's a continuation from the neighbors having the same, but would this absolutely be necessary? Could you actually take and cut the trees down that are actually, you know, the roots are exposed and they're going to fall, and just slope it up with the same smaller stone going up versus a wall, or would? Well,
I tell you, you know, we've seen that over and over. I mean, we've probably done maybe 75 walls over the last 10 years. And one of the problems with is, you know, Mother Nature isn't too forgiving. And some of the smaller stones, riprap, they just do not do the job. Sometimes they just get carried away. But the other thing is that without closing off as many voids as you can, you know, that water comes through and still pulls all the fines out through. And we found that they've been disasters. In fact, we're repairing 2 riprap shorelines, right, you know, that are in proposal right now. So it's very hard for the property owners to look at their property and see all their shoreline kind of washing away. And they get to a point where they just said, I don't care what it takes, I need this protected. You know, it's very hard for them to continue to see the loss of the shoreline.
And also, I see the stairs are going to be removed over here.
That is correct.
Are they going to have access to the lake?
Yes, they have access actually in the existing area that's over here. I don't know if you can see the stairs. That comes down, and the shoreline actually you know, the existing ledge kind of comes up, and it's actually kind of a natural walkway down through there. So we had talked to them about maybe replacing those stairs, and at this time, you know, they'd say, let's remove it and let's see how that works, and just live with the other stairs at this point. Because it's not a set of stairs actually right down to the beach, but it is a natural way to get down there.
This lot's on the broad lake, isn't it?
It is.
East west.
Yep.
Nothing, no island, nothing protecting it from the waves.
There's a little bit of protection in there, but it still has a significant exposure. Yep. Yeah, it's a beautiful area.
Some questions from the board? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to start a little discussion about these retaining walls in general, since we have 3 applications that are having this tonight. I think everybody knows the state is in the process of doing a Shoreline Protection Act. Our own rep is actually a proponent of that. And these large seawalls are really discouraged. In fact, the document that they have shows that they really don't want to have these kinds of structures built. They would prefer to have either natural vegetation or a wall that is much smaller. And the reasons for that are obviously water quality and habitat degradation, but also when you build a large wall, you tend to promote erosion on the neighboring properties that may not have a wall. The wind doesn't always come directly west, it can come north-south, and when it does, it creates a shearing force that erodes neighboring properties when you have a large wall here. Now, for this one, you're basically connecting 2 existing walls, so that may not be as much of an issue here. But I think that this is something that we really need to look into in a little bit more detail. I would like to do site visits for all of these, just to make sure we're doing the right thing. And the other thing that I've noticed is when you drive down Bay Road and look back by the fishing access at the properties to the east, you'll see a bunch of seawalls, and some have some natural vegetation that was planted there which catch a lot of the stormwater, and then some are just lawn going right up to the seawall, so that runoff goes right into the lake. And I would argue that really we want to promote some that have natural vegetation, both in trees and bushes, to catch some of that stormwater. And so this is kind of we're going to get a lot more of these. And I'm not so sure we want to build a seawall or promote decisions that will require seawalls being built around all of our shoreline. If we cause erosion to neighboring properties by some of these seawalls, that's a major concern. Not everybody has the resources to build a large seawall.
Well, I'd like to answer a few of those things. I certainly know the direction that the state's going into and some of the things that they are promoting. The one thing I will tell you is that many of the areas that we're looking at today were fully vegetated. They were completely vegetated down to the shoreline, but they're gone now. There's nothing there other than exposure of just a lot of roots. So what do you do with recreating that situation other than to protect the remaining shoreline that you do have? And I think that's the one thing I think the state is missing. I know that they're heavily promoting not mowing the last 15 feet on any shoreline to try to trap all of that area, and I don't disagree with any of that. But I tell you, when people are watching their shoreline disappear and there's not a thing that they can do about it, and if they're not going to be allowed to actually come out and protect their property, you know what? They've given up an awful lot, and many of them have paid an enormous amount of money to live on the shoreline, and then all of a sudden, the first thing they're doing is saying, I'm losing my shore, and there's not a thing I can do about it. So I don't disagree with some of the things that you said, but I also believe that a very rigid reinforcement of the embankment is absolutely required in many areas, and you're not going to get that with vegetation. We've seen it over and over. I had a project in Colchester. There was 10,000 yards of material removed from the storm. 10,000 yards. If that had been reinforced, it would still be there. And that was a heavily vegetated slope also. But once all that vegetation washed away and the sand was there, it just kept falling over and over and over again. So it's fine to say, that's not the direction that we want to go into. But in the meantime, those who own that shoreline are at huge risk, already are in a situation where their shore is greatly compromised. So I guess I'm here tonight, for those who are looking for that protection. And I will tell you too, the shot rock that gets placed behind the stone to reinforce this as a monolithic design, when the water comes into that, it does a lot of purification just going through all that stone. And so I think maybe a combination of things in the future, but to just say we don't want to do that anymore, I think would be a huge mistake.
I agree with that, just about everything you said there, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
The question is how can we design these seawalls in the most environmentally sensitive way that combines the necessary features as well as won't impact neighboring property owners, because that is a major concern. They are shown to cause further erosion in areas where there are no seawalls.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we always are considerate of that, because sometimes we'll actually take the walls and redirect things so that it actually creates, an additional deflection area so that it is not affecting the neighbor property, so it's not kind of just following the wall and that type of thing. You'll see another wall, maybe it's the next presentation. It's also down on Ordway Shore Road. And the owner said, you know what, I'm not quite ready to reinforce this wall. I think I'm okay. Several months later, a huge slope failure. Half of the entire slope gone. He has nothing else to do other than to try to repair it, because right now it's gone way up onto his property where he used to enjoy and have a patio area and everything else, and that's gone. So, and actually the trees that were up above have actually kind of moved down below. They've all slid down to the bottom, and to come to someone and say, listen, gosh, I'm really sorry about that, but that's not the kind of repair we'd like to see over there. I'm not sure that that's fair, and I think.
Does anybody really come up with? I've heard that the events that we had recently could be considered as much as a 500-year event as far as the elevation of the lake. There's an argument that it's unprecedented, something that we may never see again.
Well, I think there has been those comments. When the lake went up to 103 1/4, everyone's saying, "Oh my gosh!" High level. When we were getting 101, everyone was saying, "Wow, the lake is high." And then we went up 2 feet above that, and of course that created an awful lot of damage because that was at levels that no one had ever seen before. You add that together with wind-blown waves and that type of thing, the destruction was enormous. But I will tell you, too, is the abnormal climate conditions that we're seeing are becoming more and more common. It's the big storm events that we've had in the last couple of years. How many people know people that have had their basement flooded out in the last few years that have never seen it before? It's large storm events, and it's the intensity of those storms that actually create those problems. And we haven't seen that kind of consistency. We've had storms that have had those same type of intensities, but not on a consistent basis like that. So I think when someone says we're never going to see that again in my lifetime, I think they're wrong. I think we are, and I think we're going to see them on a much more regular basis. And I think we need to be prepared for it.
Steve, if you were going to plant something other than grass in a 15-foot buffer, what would you?
Well, there is recommendations. There are certain plant species that are recommended that are deep-rooted, that continue to grow and that type of thing. But like I said, we have had sites that have had all those vegetations, and that.
I'm talking about in addition to the wall.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. In addition to the wall too, it's just that at some point, if you got the wall there, the place that's protected is where the slope comes down to the shoreline, where the waves are working and that type of thing. It just under really severe conditions, we have rarely seen any vegetation that's extremely successful, and I'm not necessarily discounting it because there are some places where it actually works extremely well. We put some on a riverside one time and I had my doubts about it, but it's actually held extremely well. you know. So I'm not saying it doesn't have its place, but the shoreline projects that we're looking at, like specifically here today, I don't see where plantings is really a good option. You'll see in the pictures of it, basically, all you're seeing is basically just massive root systems.
So I wasn't thinking about below the wall, but above the wall, I was wondering, I'd heard that grass roots just don't hold soil in it.
Well,
Compared to what others, and I don't know what those other.
yeah, I'm not sure we are talking about grass per se. You know, there is a lot of other like plant, you know, and I can't give you a full list of that, but we do work with landscape architects that, you know, that help us develop plans to do that.
Planted some, I'm trying to think of them, like Lily of the Valley, I had to plant like 6,000 of them on a bank.
Ground edge.
So maybe to start with, we can encourage them to voluntarily try to put something.
I think so.
Some
One
kind
thing,
of buffer in
going
there.
back to what I was saying is, I think the majority of the seawall applications that I've seen in the last couple of years, they're dramatically different than any seawall application than we saw prior to the storm events and the high water event.
Mhm.
I mean, this is still damage control. Like I say, these properties suffered some significant, you know, damage, and it was a game changer for a lot of these property owners.
Sure.
I don't see these as really, they are an improvement, but I mean, we're still just trying to do a lot of damage control here to get people back to shore where they were before.
Well, there's no doubt.
If we don't, we're just gonna see, if these people just let this piece of property, left it alone, we're just gonna continually see more and more erosion, and to me, we're gonna have more detrimental effect on the watershed than if we do some of these measures.
Well, as I was telling you, the amount of sediment that's pulled out into the lake as a result of some of these failures is astronomical. You know, I don't know for those who are familiar with Shelburne Farms at the gardens down there, but years ago there was a reinforcement that occurred right on the slope just beyond that. When we did our research on that, since the 40s, there had been like 50 feet of erosion. You know, so when you look at that embankment and where it was before, that has all occurred in the last 60 years or so, and it's enormous. Of course, big exposure there. There's no doubt about it, but it just tells you the kind of things that we're up against to try to protect the existing shoreline. And you're absolutely correct, Mark. You know, some of these exposures are already out there. They're just waiting for that next one that's going to take the rest of it away. And if we don't come in and reinforce that right now, they are going to lose the rest of it. And some people just don't have the finances to be able to do it because it is not inexpensive. So it's a tough situation for those who live on the lake that had the damage done that just can't afford to repair it at this point.
Should I make a couple
Sure,
comments?
just one second. Any other questions from board members? Go ahead, sir. Could you identify yourself?
Jeff Jackson. I've attended at least one state hearing on this issue, and their proposal is driven by water quality, the way I understand it, and the water quality issue isn't generated at the shoreline. It's generated from the rivers and the streams and the agricultural runoff. And as you heard in the sworn testimony here among the Rosebrook, the shoreline owners are going to bear the brunt of that. Not to say that something shouldn't be done, but this isn't the case where one size fits all. Western exposure, northern exposure on Lake Champlain is a lot different than any exposure on Lake Fairleigh or Lake Maury or some little pond. So I think that the board needs to keep an open mind and look at a combination of options. in all these situations that come up. Because, you know, so much of the shoreline is unique from, you know, foot to foot almost with what's going on. So, but as far as the water quality, they know where the point sources are. And any of this proposal that they want to run through isn't going to really have any effect on that without going after those point sources, which is politically suicide for those representatives, because they're going to be going after the farmers and the agricultural, you know, heritage of Vermont and everything else. So it's a difficult situation. I believe that the owners, for the most part, are the best stewards of their land, and I think the state has programs that work. Backyard forestry, you can work with county foresters, you can do things like that. Everybody knows people want to protect their property, and I think that there's some reasonable things that could be done without overdoing a law or legislation to put a Band-Aid on something.
Andy, can I ask you a question? Is it possible for you to bring up an image that I've got on my computer on Google Earth, which shows Bay Road, which shows two different construction?
Is that pertinent? Yeah, we're getting off on a tangent here that this has got to do with things outside of what's in our zoning ordinances, the application that's here. We're still bound. I mean, this is a quasi-judiciary board to adjudicate the zoning ordinances, not to get into geopolitical discussions about runoff, agriculture, etc. So I just assume keep it on track, though.
I'm showing images of two different seawalls side by side. You don't think that that's relevant?
Well, maybe you could just explain the point to us. What's your point?
Well, these two houses on Bay Road, both of which are relatively new. One person built a large seawall with grass going right down, and the adjacent property owner vegetated it right up into the seawall and shows it more of a riprap. Although I don't want to make it sound like it's small boulders, it's fairly large boulders. But in those instances where you have to build seawalls, I think we can make an argument that the one that has it's more vegetated rather than just a straight block wall is probably more in line with the direction we want to go as far as, causing further erosion down the road to neighboring property owners. And that's where my main concern here. I don't want to...
Does it concern this application, the adjacent property owners? You just said that I think we just came to the conclusion that it's probably the best thing to do to tie these two seawalls together.
The one that we're talking about right now is an infill project. And I would absolutely agree for some of the arguments that Bill had made, because it is an open area between, with all the rest of it is reinforced at this point. So it would be my opinion that absolutely. Plus, there's an enormous amount of erosion that's occurring right now in addition to that. That's already occurred. And, and here again, I mean, the property owners, if you were to look at this area in here, all this area in here, there's no doubt they are lovers of vegetation, of growth, of flowers, of everything, because that's all that is in that area. But they also realize that they're losing their shoreline. So they have a combination, and they've done everything they can to treat, there's a lot of recharge that goes on in all this area also. All the discharge that comes off from in this area is all recharged in this area. And so they've done extremely well on their property, and they still have, a lot of issues with their actual shoreline. And it's going to be actually a challenge to actually reinforce some of that, just because the amount of exposed roots where it's void underneath it. It's gone. It's been pulled out already. So, and you can actually see that in some of the pictures.
So Mark, where I'm headed with this, I certainly understand the need for this project, and I think that connecting these two walls is probably a good thing, but I would ideally like to combine a site visit for all of these seawall issues, because I think some of the other ones, we are gonna have an issue where we have to be concerned about erosion
No doubt.
on neighboring.
I think it's,
And this is.
it's a good idea to do site visits. We've done plenty of them, so. For right now, we're here to take testimony. We're not here to get into a geopolitical debate about legislation that may or may not get passed. I'd like to keep it focused on the application, and if the board, as a board, decides we want to do a site visit, based on a motion and a vote to do so, we'll do so. Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess as far as the Maniscalco property, I think that's a good summary. If there's any questions about it, I'd be glad to answer them.
Peter?
Well, yeah, regarding the size of the boulders that you're using here, it goes back to the Colchester example that you cited. I think it's an very easy case to make. If the cost of the size of the retaining wall, to lose 10,000 yards of material into the lake, for me, that's an easy argument. That's a massive amount of erosion and runoff into the lake.
Yeah.
So.
Well, when you're juggling water quality issues and you're juggling sediment discharge, when we're dealing with stormwater facilities, we talk about sediment loadings and that type of thing. There isn't any loadings that we're looking at that are 10,000 yards. I'll tell you that. I mean, that's
most people can't appreciate how much material that is.
Absolutely. Well, when you figure a tractor trailer is 15 yards,
right,
and you can consider 10,000, that's a lot of material. So that from the Maniscalco standpoint, I think that's a good summary. And like I said, any questions?
Any other comments from people in the audience? So, it's not necessarily written in the staff report, but we can certainly take a motion and put it to vote to do a site visit. We can continue this application, or we can approve this application. We've got a couple more of these on our agenda tonight, so.
Good, I don't.
It's the temperature of the board. What do you got to say, Dave?
I tend to agree with Bill in the respect that maybe we need to look at some of these, but I don't think this particular one fits that category. I think we should move on this one tonight.
I agree.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm not going to disagree that there's issues. Our ordinance is pretty broad. I mean, it's got a lot of leeway. We rely on design professionals. There's in the language. We rely on your experience. We're not here to design people's projects for them. We're here to conform to the zoning ordinance and to the town plans.
So I just have one applicant before we move on this.
Okay.
One question. Just want to verify that the seawall you're constructing is going to be no higher than the adjoining seawalls both to the north and south?
That is correct. It takes off from the same elevation and ties in at the same elevation. Well, actually, it's not the same elevation. There's a correction. It starts there, and it ties the same elevation, and it actually ties into a different elevation here, but it's a transition that goes across here so that it's consistent. But where it ties in on both ends, it's the same elevation.
Thank you.
You're staying at about 104.6 all the way across, and then just tying in, just kind of matching in.
Yep. And it's amazing, the people that do this type of work, that do a lot of it, the ability to select rocks, to rotate them into the right position and get the elevations is just, I've seen it done, as I said, hundreds of times, and I'm never ceased to be amazed at how talented they are.
Any other questions? Discussion? Somebody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve as written. Staff report.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Very good.
Thank you.
Good luck with that one. it. Next on the agenda, I guess you're
Not going anywhere.
anywhere,
Any is the McCain one up next? Okay.
This is application C13-17. Another application by Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of Nathan and Melissa McKay for a conditional use approval for a lakeshore erosion control structure at 357 Ordway Shore Road, located in the Rural District and the Lakeshore Overlays. Annie? Give us a
Yeah,
summary.
once again, I will let Steve fill you in on the technical aspects. As proposed, this project doesn't appear to raise any issues pertaining to conditional use review criteria. As far as the zoning in the Lakeshore overlay, as proposed, there are two sets of stairways, one existing and one newer stairway proposed. That would require 800 feet of shoreline, 800 feet of shoreline, as stated in section 1750. Basically, I believe the applicant has 212 feet, so they don't have enough for the two. We
Right.
talked about that.
Yes, we will talk this.
The other issue is the applicant is proposing that existing trees within the shot rock stabilization area in the 100-foot setback be removed. According to the bylaws, removal of trees in the 100-foot setback requires an approved setback cutting plan. The board may want to require this as a condition of approval.
Okay.
And then the same issue as with the first one, if you have any questions about
As far as the materials.
visual compatibility and the surrounding shoreline and biotechnical erosion, I suggest that you ask them.
Steve?
So this is the property that I had talked about with a significant failure, where the owner, and actually Nate McKay is actually back here, and he's here with us tonight. And as I mentioned before, it was one of those areas that certainly had signs of some initial erosion, kind of hoping to get the longevity out of it as much as he possibly could. But unfortunately, shortly thereafter our site visit, there was a massive slope failure that went right along that whole top line, of which that all just rotated completely. So it was a complete slope failure, and kind of a typical pattern, but kind of unfortunate, but it did happen. So that's down there. And just for a correction, we're not necessarily looking to take down any trees that would be beyond where the failure zones are. So if that's the failure zones, we wouldn't be taking any. But I think in one of the pictures you can actually see some of the trees that actually have moved down the slope that actually got to be taken right out of there. And
When were these pictures taken, Steve?
they were taken probably within the last 2 months. Actually, there's a good picture right there. I don't know if that's the top of the embankment right there. You can see that's all gone. You know, that's all rotated. You can see all the trees that have come down as a result of it. You can see this one that's actually kind of coming up with that. That came down from up here. So this would all have to be cleaned up, and actually all the slough in here taken out in order to reinforce this slope appropriately. So, and our proposal with regards to the stairs, one of the things that, can you actually go back to that other picture you had, Annie? The plan. So that's the existing condition. Is there the, there we go. So this area right here, when this was built, maybe not done quite to the quality standards that we're used to. And what's happening is that all these rocks right here are rotating, and some of these are all rotating. and the access that goes down to the beach is this area right here, and that is all eroding. So our suggestion is to get rid of that completely, make that solid, and reinforce all of that, and create another access way down to the down to the beach. And we're proposing it in this area right here, because that has to be reconstructed anyway. So we can do that simultaneously with reconstructing that slope. And so we would still end up with one access way down to the beach, eliminate this one, create this one, but create this as we're doing this entire embankment. And that's kind of the same thing, same type of construction, a wall on the bottom, and here again, with slope coming back in, tying back into the top of the slope where the failure zone occurred, and just reinforcing it that way. We're not necessarily topsoiling that on the top here, but the one thing that I will tell you is even the areas that we don't do that, we do get natural vegetation growth that comes up in between all the rocks. And I'm sure as you've driven around, you've seen that same pattern occur over and over again.
What type of stone are you going to use, Steve?
Now over here, I think what we were proposing was a Whitcomb stone. And theirs is a good stone from the standpoint of the blasting pattern that they use, and it's very blocky, and it ends up being a very good material to use on something like this, and it also kind of minimizes the number of voids that are created when you put it together, especially if you have a good operator. So that's a material, and that sometimes is brownish, can be a little bit reddish at times and stuff like that. But once it's out there for a while, it all seems to neutrally kind of blend together.
What's the existing wall that's rotating? What's the material?
Well, that is, I believe, more of a Panton stone.
It is Panton stone.
Yeah, and it's a grayish, more of a grayish color.
Is there a color discontinuity there?
Well, there is a division. You know, it kind of stops at this point, and there's a visual break at this point, and then this continues over. I will tell you where I have seen people using different materials, such as we've had projects where we've done two adjoining properties together, and they both chose different materials. You know, and if it's done correctly, it really doesn't have an adverse appearance to it. I mean, you look at it and it still looks really nice. You know, like I said, but the Panton stone, even the texture to it's a little smoother, but it's got a lot of cracks to it and that type of thing. The Whitcomb stone, like I said, a little brownish, maybe a little bit of reddish in there, other dark colors, and that tends to be really blocky.
The neighbors to the north have Whitcomb stone, or
Yep.
they're planning to use the same stone.
So as we're looking at the match up here, that's the same as here. So at some point, we're going to make that transition.
Thank you. Was the neighbor's wall failing as well?
It was. That was reconstructed last year. This one over here.
They had a failing, they had an existing wall there, right?
Yes.
It was several years old, I mean, it was from concrete, I believe, and I'm sure it's been failing for several years, but they had that replaced last year. That's actually when I inquired with Steve about should we connect them at this point. And he gave me some things to look out for, and sure enough, exactly what he told me to look out for is exactly what occurred.
So did you do those other walls?
I did not do the wall that failed?
Well, the wall didn't fail where we were at. This was all just a natural slope.
No.
That
We
was
did.
gonna be my question. When
We
there-
did the
prior to
replacement.
this, there was no
Nothing,
wall.
this was just a wooded area.
It was a wooded, vegetated
Wooded,
bank.
vegetated area, and my thoughts were is that it had really nice trees in it. You know, as a matter of fact, it was just thick trees. You couldn't even see the lake from there. And I felt like the root systems in there were great, but there was some exposure of roots from the 2011 high waters. But there was some, and when you came out, you had even mentioned that one thing that might be protecting me there is that there is some, what do you call it, the shale ledge there was ledge that was underneath it that you don't know what it actually looks like, but it may be supporting those trees and stuff. So my thoughts were, let's watch it for a few more years and see what happens, and and plus also what you guys were talking about from a budget standpoint. I was like, this isn't an easy project to just come up with on a whim. So, as far as finances go, so I had decided to just kind of keep an eye on it rather than join in with the Jansons with connecting the two. But this spring is when we had a lot of heavy rains in a short amount of time, and from what I understand, he said what happens is that the soil gets saturated, and then the trees, the wind comes. We're direct west and northwest exposure. Even the Maniscalcos are. And when it gets windy, you have an appreciation for Mother Nature there. And it was like 10 o'clock at night. We just heard a crack. And I thought there was a leaning tree out there. I thought that maybe it just broke. But the next morning when I went out, it was much worse. There was 10 trees that failed in that zone. And what was the scariest part, for us is that, and this is something that I appreciate what you say, is that it's not one size fits all. Is that, for us, is that, that's our bedrooms on that corner. So it's not just ourselves, but our children sleep 20 feet from where this failure occurred. And, things start to process in your head as to what do I need to do to protect this house, and that's what he's trying to say too. And, but anyway, it's scary, and the only solution that we have that we know of is to build some form of a wall to protect it. It may not be something that lasts forever, but at least it's the first stage of that. At this point in time, if anyone knows of, is the best sense of security for this situation.
Anything else, Steve?
No, I think it's a lot of the same things that we talked about. I mean, obviously, all three of these are different. The conditions are different. The lengths are different. The geometry is different. But the concepts are all the same for all of these. And like I said, it's about protecting the existing embankments and doing it in a respectful way. And I think if you were to look at some of the walls that have gone in and, with similar type of patterns, they look very nice.
Sure. The walls that we did 3 or 4 years ago, we followed up on anything else. I'm just curious.
The seawalls we approved?
That we approved on the west side of the county.
A couple of them never got built.
Oh, really?
Yep. And I can think of one that was done that they went way over, above and beyond to try to make, remember the big monstrous concrete wall?
Right.
They actually, they clad all that with wood. And one did not get built that I can think of. And there was another one south of there that I saw this summer that they do the job. And like I said before, I mean, this is this is kind of a crisis situation. I think that,
Yeah, it is. I mean,
pretty unusual.
fortunately, the water's been receding this summer, but in the spring when it hit and when the water was still pulling on those trees, it was nerve-wracking. And at some point, additional trees actually fell into the slope, and I called Steve, and he just recommended that we cut them because it was going to potentially harm the next group of trees. Because once you can see where the roots start pulling on each other, and you start to see the sinking. It's not a fun thing to see, but it is what it is. At this point, we just want to try to rectify it the best that we can.
Any questions from board members?
Yeah, I noticed Annie did not bring some food motion. There was discussion of verbiage on the steps.
Just because of the steps.
Right, so I'm looking at the plans, and the steps are indeed there. The old steps and the new steps, so how do we handle that?
I would recommend at this point, based on what Steve has said, that just if you were inclined to approve it, to approve it with the condition saying that the existing
Good.
step or existing access has to be removed or the new steps on.
So they're willing to live with one set of stairs?
Well, that's the regulation. It's 1 per 400 feet. And we were well aware of that at the time. We were just making a discussion of whether we do a fully protected set of stairs that go down, or do we live with the stairs that they have now that are continuing washed out and that type of thing. And that was the discussion. So we kind of left both of them on there, and then the final discussion was is that let's go with the protected. This is the time, when it gets reconstructed, it's the best time to do it all, and let's get rid of the stairs that need.
Actually, the existing stairways are mostly eroded at this point right now. It's more of a scramble.
So it's, I mean, this is basically a phase situation where you're going to utilize the existing stairs until the new stairs are built, if I'm reading you right? Is that?
Yeah, well, I guess we will never have more than one set of stairs out there, and it's like I said, I don't like to make any judgment on whether someone's willing to pay for a new set of stairs. So the discussion was is that a direction that you want to go, or do you want to try to live with the existing ones? And in the end, I think Nate's just saying, listen, we got to repair all of that anyway. It can all be done together at the same time, and it just makes the most sense, and we'll just get rid of the other ones. Because even in addition to what I was talking about, I don't know if I mentioned it before, these stones right here are all rotated. And these are big stones, but they're not as big as the ones we normally do. And what they were intended to do is be vertical like this, and they all have rotated out like this.
And above that, we live on a big slope, and above that is our house. So if that slope goes, then essentially we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So what you can't see there, but where the house sits is how many feet above the lake level?
Yep.
Oh, probably at least 20 feet.
Yeah, so it's a pretty steep slope right to our existing wall, but as he's saying, that's currently.
Finished floors at 126 feet above the water, and you're down and working in the 100-foot range, so.
Right, yeah, I think the house was an original camp at some point.
It's right up there.
Because the garage was built beyond that's why the garage isn't connected, because it was 100 feet right between them.
Mhm.
As Nate was mentioning, what happens in these areas when the rains come in is that the soil type that's out there, when it gets saturated, it loses its shear strength. So the ability for soil to hold together is gone, and that's where the failure comes in. And
So ultimately, I think, Jeff, to answer your question, when it's all said and done, there's going to be one set of stairs.
Use the motion from the last, it's almost exactly the same.
We could probably craft something
Right,
together.
and then add the stair condition.
So you ready for the motion?
Let's do this.
Yep.
Motion to approve as written, except VC 13-17. Note that there would be one stairway.
I'll second that.
Can I add one thing in there? Dick, you reminded me of something that we had a situation come to us 8, 9, 10 months ago where somebody had to come back and make kind of a de facto application on a seawall that got changed slightly. Because basically it was like something you discovered mid-construction. I can't remember who it was. And it was kind of difficult, but I guess I would just ask that if we can condition it somehow that if there's any significant deviation from this plan or any of these seawall plans due to means and methods that come up and issues that come up, that you let us know.
Well, what's supposed to happen is that there's a certification that it was built exactly, and if it's not, there's not supposed to be a certification.
Right.
I mean, we're supposed to certify that.
The state, right?
Huh?
That's the state.
No, that's not through the state. No, it goes back to the town.
There really is no, CEA is very good about doing that, but there really is no.
I don't remember.
Check, there's no process, it just comes and it goes in the file.
Right.
If you were very concerned about that, I would suggest that you require a new set of plans with the building permit.
We can certainly, would you mind if we condition it with a set of as-bills? Can we
Yeah.
retroactively do that on the other
Well, you
seawall?
can do the as-bills, but once they've already got the permit, it's built, there really isn't any, there's no way to really enforce that after the fact.
Well, I guess
And you can put that as a condition.
we need to come up with, craft some type of a condition. I'll review it when we go to sign the decision, and we can circulate it amongst the board members.
Is this something you'd like to see in all of them, or just this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a problem. I mean, we can spend all the time in the world going through what we go through, and if it doesn't get enforced or some closure.
Sometimes it was difficult when you're in midstream to stop.
I understand that.
To run it at least by zone.
Well, I'm just curious, and maybe you know the answer, in the past, has there been an instance where it's changed?
I can't think of any that were a significant
I don't
change.
think this was one of your projects.
Yeah, well, typically, like I said, we have an issue with that because we do like to certify everything at the completion. And if there is a change, I can tell you, I'm not going to put my name on a certification. And
What
so,
I'm trying to do mostly is, because I've been dealing with a lot of this lately, is to protect the property owner.
yeah,
Because if somebody was doing their due diligence for a refinance or a transfer and caught it that it wasn't closed in there, somehow the I wasn't dotted and the T wasn't crossed, then you gotta go back and get somebody to write a letter.
well, there's some other issues too. I mean, all of the projects that you're looking at today are all built above elevation 98. But let's say somebody would come in and build something down below the 98 contour. Well, that falls into Army Corps jurisdiction and requires a whole nother set of permits and everything else. So they are at risk in a situation like that because the Army Corps could say, you know, we didn't accept that, and that level of material down there is unacceptable to us. Take it out. So
That happened recently.
where was that?
Pine Haven Shores,
Oh, really?
in a big way.
That's not cheap.
Yeah. So they'll learn.
Anyway.
They'll learn from that.
I'm not sure if this will work, but perhaps, I'm not sure, I have to check further, but requiring a CO.
That's okay. I'll let you work on that until we sign a decision. How's that? So anyways, we've got a motion.
One quick, was that the item 3 of the last one, that the inspection within 90 days of completion, is that what you're getting at here? Or in addition, you're doing something else?
Yeah, typically, I filed that one back there already, but these guys have to, partly, the ordinance says they have to write a letter certifying that it was built. Yes, professional engineer has to, that it was.
Okay.
So that letter's fine, but, just because you're such an honest character, Steve, and you do your job, it's safe with you, but yeah, it was a problem about a year ago, so.
Well, you know, if that's a condition, I have no problem, you know, for the ones that we do. If you said, listen, we would want verification of as-built, which means, you know, toe a slope maybe, top a wall.
Tops and toes.
And that type of thing, so that you just get that verification. And I have no problem with that. I think, like you said, that's just a little additional security.
Had that been a requirement, it would have saved this problem in a little while.
Yep,
so.
yep.
I'm okay with just putting the condition in there that they've got to submit as-bills
Okay.
for your review in comparison to the permit drawings. So anyways, we have a motion on the table.
Yeah, second.
Peter seconded. Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thank you. Really, not easy you guys have to sit here. Appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Alrighty, back to the playbook. This is item 8 on the agenda, application CU 13-18, another application by Civil Engineering Associates on behalf of Jeff Halverson for a conditional use approval for a lakeshore erosion control structure. Property is at 422 Lands End Lane. It's located in the Rural District and the Lakeshore Overlay District. Need to swear anybody in who's going to speak to this application? Hereby swear or affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, and the pains and penalties of perjury. Thank you. Annie, you're still sworn in.
Similar, well, not similar construction, but similar in concept to the first wall in the fact that it doesn't really propose or raise any issues with conditional use review or the rural zoning district or floodplain or water source overlay. Yeah, very similar things. Just board members may want to request clarification on the requirements again, 1753.84, 1753.85, which again are the shoreline compatibility and the biotechnical erosion control methods. This one does have 2 set of stairways proposed. They have over 1,200 feet of shoreline, not an issue. And
Okay.
I'll let Steve tell you more details.
Annie, can I just ask
Sure.
you, you talk about in advance of any cutting or site preparation activity, regarding removal of trees and stuff, as far, and the need to submit an approved plan. Can you talk more about that here?
Sure, this particular property actually does have an approved cutting plan, which is required within the 100-foot setback. Basically, the plans denote areas of forest management and view management, which have different requirements on what trees can be cut. I spoke with Steve earlier, and this particular plan, since they already have, or this particular project, being as the cutting plan is already in place, they won't need to do any additional cutting at this point.
So what they propose is in compliance with that plan?
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I can say, though, is on that property, that when the cutting was done, it had to do with just those compromised trees that were at the top of the embankment. Many of them were starting to rotate, and one of the problems that happens is when those trees fail, they pull out an enormous amount of soil out of the top of the embankment and actually significantly add to the amount of erosion that occurs on those embankments. You're better off cutting them off. I'm not talking about taking out the root system, but you're better off cutting them off at the bottom when they're already compromised. There are some trees up there that even if you go out there right now, if you look underneath them, it's probably 5 or 6 feet undercut below the tree. And or if you stand on the top, you can look right through all the roots down, right down the face, down to the shoreline. So there was a significant amount of trees that were modified in that area, but all of them were compromised. None of them were healthy trees, and there was a couple dead ones, but most of them were ones that were already in a compromised condition, or rotated, or maybe, and many of them had fallen. We had looked at Lot 1 on Shelburne Point, went out there with Annie, and as we went through there, we marked some of the trees that we thought were potential to be removed in the future, and but we didn't have our permit for that, so we kind of left it. But I said, some of these trees are endangered. Actually, many of those trees, or actually 3 of them, have fallen since then. They're actually down in the lake now. So in retrospect, that have been good to take, but we actually, right now, the rules are is until you establish your management zones, you actually can't cut any trees on the property. But unfortunately, in my opinion, the ones that are compromised, diseased, or dead should be taken at any time. And that's something that will probably come back to you at some point as we look at the Shelburne Point approval, and maybe try to modify the final findings, and at least allow for the maintenance of top of embankment over there, because it doesn't allow you to do that. Because some of those lots aren't being developed at this point and aren't going to establish a management zone for maybe quite a while, yet we have this compromising position with all these trees on the top of embankment. I mean, that's a separate issue, but that's probably coming up.
I'm kind of surprised there isn't language in there. I've seen a couple of them that have had language about maintenance, invasive species, dangerous and diseased trees.
There's a lot of language.
Is there?
Extremely complicated, and it sort of goes back over itself.
Still, you think it would be fairly plain that if you had a...
But the bottom line is, so the town's position, though, is until you have your management zones established, you can't actually cut any trees,
That is the bottom line.
other than maybe invasive. Or maybe you can't cut those either, I don't know.
I think it's any cutting, you have to double check that.
See, and that's, I think it was a huge oversight at the time when the regulation, when all the findings were established at that time, but it really limits us now to actually manage it appropriately. So we'll be coming back to you for that, because I think we can't wait until we get all those lots developed. At that point, there'll be just nothing but trees in the water down below, and so.
I thought we rewrote that.
If you did, I'd love to see it.
I thought we rewrote it. I know we addressed it, but I can't remember.
Would you mind looking into that, Dick, or?
Well, I'm wondering if it was the plan that got kicked back and it's, if we actually got into that. I'll ask.
Okay. Because it's my understanding, otherwise, we would have to come back and do an amendment to final plan. Get that approved, yeah, yeah.
When Tucker was here, we had a discussion about it, and I don't recall exactly where it went.
Okay. All right. Well, if you should happen to come across it, that'd be fantastic, so.
I can also look through the minutes and see.
Okay.
So this is a little bit more of the same. The one thing I can say, this is at the very northern tip of Shelburne Point, and the exposure is huge. I've been out there when it was as calm as could be and just absolutely gorgeous, and I've been out there when the wind is whipping and, get out of the way. And we have a lot of the same thing. We have a lot of erosion. And there is one owner here, Jeff Alverson owns this lot, it's lot number 4, although this portion of that, even though this is part of his lot, it's also under common access. So anybody that lives down the point actually can access this location also. Jeff's taken it upon himself to say, I'd hate to see any more erosion occur to that embankment. So he's taken it upon himself to take care of that because he just doesn't want to see it erode any further. And I think if you look at some of the pictures, especially some of the ones that are kind of in the cove area over here and over here, the erosion is significant. And like I said, the exposure is really. Let's see here. Well, I think what you're looking at right here is, I think what you're looking at is all the soil gone from right here, and you can see this is one tree that was cut, and this is just a huge void underneath it, and this is actually right here is where the wall would be. And come back in here and reinforce all of this. And but you can see how much has been taken out of that.
That's a heck of a tree cutting plan.
Yeah, we got one tree. And so this is all gone through here, and you can see this is kind of like a vertical face at this point. So the trees that were up here are gone at this point too. And the one thing nice at least about the point, there are trees that are behind it that are protected at this point. But the ones that are right on the top of the embankment, none of them that were on solid ground were cut. The only ones that were cut, like I said, were the ones that were compromised. But there is a lot of this on that entire north end. And so it's just more of the same. There would be a access point at each end, and I think it actually would be, they would be entitled to 3 shoreline access, but actually you're only proposing 2. And
Steve, is that ramp, what's the purpose of that ramp that you show?
it's the only place that they can actually get lake access from.
It's a boat ramp, right?
It can be used as a boat ramp. I think that they're planning on putting a dock out in that location.
Yep.
And I think they have worked with dock doctors to figure out how that assembly could be done and stuff like that. It's a tough spot because when it's windy, it's windy. Yeah.
Steve, will the wall tie in with the existing ledge that's out there?
It does. At every point where it ties in, it ties right back into ledge. Yeah, yeah. In fact, my understanding right now, Island Excavating may be doing this wall, And what they do is when they do get to the ledge, they actually chip into that and anchor it as best that they can too. They do a really good job of anchoring both ends of the wall.
What was the height of that bank that eroded? Like, from a picture, it's kind of hard to get.
It's actually not that high. It's probably 8 feet. I think that typically. Now, there were some other areas. As you get down into this area, that's where, when you're looking at the point, that's where the top of embankment really starts to climb, and it's really a complete ledge face. And quite frankly, there's not much you can do about it.
Are going to be 6 feet, 6 feet high?
They can be, yeah, they can
So
be.
you're sloping back just about 3 feet upwards.
They don't slope back.
The rock, the hill-in rock going up?
Oh, yes, yeah. Actually, no, I think we're planning on putting it flat in and kind of just feather that in as best we can, as opposed to, there might be a slight angle on that, but I think he didn't really want to see any of the stone.
Oh, okay.
You know, he said, when I'm looking out there, I don't want to see any of that stone on the top. So, well, I think we'll have to grade it.
Yeah.
I think that's the way that we'll have to deal with it.
Looking at 6 foot exposure?
I think it is somewhere around there.
Yeah, it goes from, it varies somewhere from like 99 up to 106.
But this is a location that needs it. It needs all of that.
Yeah.
What's the general color of the stone, Steve?
The Whitcomb stone, again, is, it's,
Reddish brown?
and they go through different veins, but that, brownish, reddish kind of color type of thing, darker color, and it actually changes.
It's a good spot for that.
Yeah, it is, and it kind of changes even as you get it up there, if it's been up there for a while. The colors kind of mute together.
So you've got 5 different sections here.
So when you're looking at some of these pictures, it looks like 20, 30 feet of shale. How does the wall react with the shale?
Well, when there's 20, 30 feet, we're not putting a wall in. I'll be honest with you, it's hard to protect it, in those situations.
I'm not talking about the ledge, I'm talking about the broken shale. There's some areas where it's like a beach, it's all shale. So will you go right up to the bank on those?
You mean, how do you build in those areas, or?
Well, I'm wondering if you build inland of the shale, are you gonna lose all that? Lose shale?
No, actually, it's funny, because if you go to a lot of beaches, you'll find that some years is a give year and some years a take year. It will actually continue to recycle. The amount of shale that they have out there this year is more than I've ever seen. It's there's probably an extra foot of shale on top of from where original grade was up there. And there's also, in this area, there's a ledge directly underneath the shale. So when you get down an extra foot below that, you're starting to get into ledge. And it's a hard ledge. It's not a shaly ledge. It's a really hard ledge.
The seawall will be anchored on there.
Yeah, what they do is they come in with a hammer and they actually chisel keyway, which is imperative to hold that rock in place. I don't know if you remember on Harbor Road when there was a road failure, and the town had it kind of sectioned off over there. So I suggested what they do is, because that was on private property, and the property owner actually wanted access down below, so what we actually did is create walls down below. And the reason for that is it was almost a slip lane failure, and the only way to resist that is to load the toe, so it doesn't want to rotate. So we did build that at the bottom and supported that to stop that rotation, and it worked out very well. And, so in that color there, Because one of the complaints is that a few years ago, there was a failure just up from that, and they used a lot of the Shelburne limestone. You can see that from across the lake. It just, it immediately catches your eye when you look at it, because it had all that white stone.
Specifically excluded from there.
Yeah, it is now, but the town is certainly.
Pretty clear, there's no gray area.
Yeah, but the town is using a few repair areas, and it was very obvious. So we tried to make that aesthetically look nice, and at the same time get the owner what they wanted, and actually create the goal that we needed for the town to reinforce that roadway. And actually, I think it actually worked out pretty well.
The owner's got a nice path right now.
He does. Yeah. So you've been over that way?
Yeah, I've seen it, yeah.
Anybody from the public that's here to speak to this application? Okay. Let him do all the talking for you. Okay. Any board members have any questions? I'm just curious how you're gonna phase this. Is this gonna be gonna do this in one shot?
It'll be done in one shot. We did, the wall that Island Excavated did in Colchester was 1,400 feet. And it actually took them, I think, 7 weeks. But that was actually a much higher wall in Colchester. This is actually a pretty low profile wall, even though it's 6 feet, it's still relatively low profile compared to what we did in Colchester.
So, I'm seeing you basically have a couple different strategies down through here, based on the different wall sections that you have. DD. Okay, so that's your ramp. Just a couple cheek walls, is that what you're doing? On the ramp on section D? You just, is that what that's showing me, Steve?
Oh, there we go. Yes, that's just to line it on the outside and put a return on it. Because then that returns to the rest of the wall as it goes in the other direction.
I do have one comment. We discussed that with the proposed rock, that they'd be turning the rocks and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, that it wasn't going to be a flush wall. It would be so that it would blend more into the shoreline, because it would be rougher looking wall, so that it would blend in more, was one of the thoughts.
There's a couple techniques that people use when they're building these. One of them is to line up the rock faces as close as you can to get a smooth face, which is fine. It has a certain look to it. One of the methods that I actually like much better is you keep rotating the rock until you fill the voids as best that you can, and it gives it a very, very rough texture, but it's got a very nice rugged look to it, and I think it's extremely attractive, and it's the one I prefer. And I think that's what you're talking about, and I'm not sure that we would govern how they build it, but today the last few that we've done, the person that's done it has done it with a very rough texture, and I actually, for me, that's the one that I prefer also.
So the objective is some degree of irregularity, I guess?
Well, the nice thing about it, in addition to having an irregular look, and it's not irregular, it's just a very rugged look to it, is that it also fills the voids in much better, and which is one of the primary reasons why we're doing this, because if you don't fill the void in, what you do is you go on the back side and use bigger rocks, but you fill that void space anyway, but it still leaves a little bit of a gap, because we still don't want that water to penetrate through and continue to grab the soils and pull them back out.
The idea was to try it and go for a more natural look than a wall, to try and disguise it as well as can be, given the function that it Steve said that can rely on the operator. It's,
Any questions from the board? Well, I'm inclined to make a motion. Listen to a motion if anybody would like to bring one up there. I think, based on the pictures, it's going to do nothing to improve the situation and mitigate the erosion into the lake.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Peter?
Make a motion for application CU 13-18 as written.
Second.
Motion to approve, I should say.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, good luck. Okay. 9 on our agenda, application SUB 0107R9. It's an application by Deborah and David Bewley for an amendment to the Rivercrest final plan. It's a proposal for the addition of a condition to allow a portion of the driveway to extend 5 feet outside of the approved building envelope. Property is at 520 Sycamore Street and is located in the residential district. Are you here to speak to this application? You might.
It's pretty straightforward.
Okay. Well, let me swear you in case you want to say something, and we'll get care of that housekeeping. Swear affirm to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, under the pains and penalties of perjury. Thank you. Annie, you're still under oath, if you could.
I'd like to start by apologizing. I told Doug to be here at 8.
Apologize.
It's okay. Applicant is requesting to amend final plan approval for planned residential development to allow for the extension of the existing driveway at 520 Sycamore Street to extend 5 feet outside the building envelope, as it is currently approved. The extension will extend the south side setback 10 feet from the side of the property line and will be 10 feet from the side of the property line. The proposed request does not appear to raise any issues with respect to town plan conformance, bylaw conformance, open space, traffic, municipal services, etc. Should a board approve this request, be waiving the side yard setback for driveways in the location depicted on the plans, which is within the board's purview per section 1930.3A. And that's pretty much it. There was a similar application several years ago to relocate a driveway in the same development that was approved.
Okay. Board members have any questions of the applicant?
I've got 2 questions for Annie. Annie, in any way are we creating a non-conforming property by doing this?
No.
We can waive side yard
We
setbacks.
can waive side yard setbacks in general, because this is a building envelope. It's just how the plan was approved, so it would need to be changed or conditioned to allow something to build outside of it, but it's, by waiving the setback, it's not creating a non-conforming. It's a special, it's in the staff report, there's a special, exception for waiving driveway setbacks.
And then my second question is, have you had any conversations at all with Dr. Nassour, or has he submitted anything, the owner of Lot 26, the adjoining property owner?
I have not personally, but the applicant has spoken with him.
And he's, received notice of this and everything?
Yes.
Okay.
So Andy, the encroachment is not the, it's this heavy line, correct? Right here.
Yes, sketched online, yeah.
So that's all paved now? That's infilled with paving, correct?
I believe, is it still?
It's not paved
It's not
yet,
paved.
it will be paved shortly.
Okay.
So the line that's on that's drawn on here actually breaks into the existing pavement, or at least what looks like pavement?
It goes right over the existing driveway. We'll pave it and it will just extend just that 5 feet further.
Over the building envelope.
Exactly.
Well, what I'm asking is this section down here, I don't know if you guys, is this actually pavement? down here?
Yes, that looks, yeah, I think so. The shaded area is already paved.
I don't have a.
It's not,
I think it's crushed stone.
No, it's not paved
the
at all.
driveway is not paved at this time.
It's not paved.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry.
It's gravel.
Yeah.
Crushed stone.
Gotcha.
So you're going to pave the area that's in the line that you've drawn on this?
Yes.
Okay.
Make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve application SUB 01-07R9 by Deborah and David Booley.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience. So, we have approval of the minutes. We have a chance to review the minutes. Does anybody have any comments, additions, subtractions, or changes on the minutes?
I've got a very minor change, Annie, on the approval of the minutes from last time. So voting was unanimous 5-0. I actually had to abstain from that because I wasn't part of it.
Anything else? No? Peter, you weren't here, right? And I'd make a motion to approve the minutes of the October 2nd meeting with the change that Bill just noted regarding the approval of the previous minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain from that.
Any abstentions? What's that?
I just didn't see who the other extension was.
Oh, no, I didn't say. I had voted to.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Guess we've got a draft decision for, well, which everybody, that was emailed to them at a late date. Looked fine to me. It was a pretty simple application. It was a shed.
Accessory structure, small shed.
If anybody has any objections, I'm gonna go ahead and sign it. Make a motion to adjourn.
Well, I have some other business.
Okay.
I just,
Make it quick, because it's late, Bill.
I just wanted to mention that the annual VLCT Planning and Zoning Forum is November 19th. It's open for all board members to attend. The town picks up I think it's a $60 fee.
Oh, the town is gonna pay for that? I think
Did
we all,
that-
I think we
That's what
all,
Dean said.
Okay, I didn't know.
we all
that.
get those emails, at least I do. Does that go to everybody on the board? Those emails from VLCT?
I got that.
No, not unless they request or sign up. I can make sure everyone does.
You
if they
should
want
probably
to.
make sure that everybody's on that mailing list on behalf of the town. Check it.
So I've gone to those the last few years, and if nobody's ever gone, I think they're quite good. It's at the Inn in Montpelier. You get a great lunch. You meet other members from around the state. They're very informative.
Okay.
If anyone wants information on it, I have it as well.
Yeah, the email was, I can forward it to the rest of the board. It was
Okay.
had a pretty decent agenda. It'll be a lot of work for you if they pass you have to start getting involved with the commercial and residential building energy codes.
Oh, we do sort of. There's been a few changes
You might
recently.
get more dumped on you too. So, all right then, any other comments, board members? Business? Take a motion to adjourn then.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.